Call or text with your thoughts, 877-301-8970.
I'm Shirley Leung, in for Margery Egan. Then we'll check in with Michael Curry. He's the CEO of the Massachusetts League of Community Health Centers and a national NAACP board member. He zooms in from the NAACP convention in North Carolina, which President Trump was not invited to attend for the first time in the organization's 116-year history. We'll get Michael's thoughts on that and more next on the 11 o'clock hour of BPR on GBH and NEPM.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Giles Snyder. More rain in the Texas Hill Country is leading to more concern about flooding. The National Weather Service in Austin says up to 5 inches fell in a few hours overnight, leading to flood warnings and watches. James Hartley of member station KERA reports that many in the faith community in hard-hit Kerrville are preparing for a lengthy recovery.
Parishioners at St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Kerrville huddled together under umbrellas and stepped through puddles on their way inside as a downpour drenched the Texas Hill Country Sunday. Just 9 days earlier, another storm assaulted this region of central Texas and led the Guadalupe River to overflow. Reverend Bert Betts is the rector at St. Peter's. He said his parish is here to support the community for the long haul.
We're not leaving. We're committed to the emotional, spiritual, material, mental needs that will arise. We're not leaving.
Betts said the people of Kerrville will need to support each other for months, and his parish will provide anything it can. For NPR News, I'm James Hartley in Kerrville.
The war in Ukraine on the agenda at the White House. President Trump meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. The meeting comes after Trump said last night that he will send Ukraine through NATO Patriot air defense missiles. Immigration was one of the issues that won President Trump a second term, but fresh polling shows some American attitudes are changing. Here's NPR's Domenico Martinaro.
When Trump first took office, immigration was one of his strengths, and a year ago in Gallup's polling, 55% of people said that they wanted immigration decreased, but that trend toward a harder line on immigration has sharply reversed. Our polling with PBS NewsHour and Marist, for example, showed Trump with just a 43% approval rating for his handling of immigration. People said that they believed America's openness to immigration is essential to what the country is. And that question about whether people wanted immigration decreased, Gallup now finds that just 30% say that they want to do that.
The Trump administration is defending its deportation efforts, and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem denies racial profiling, says the administration will appeal a judge's ruling that halts more aggressive tactics. Jury trial is set to begin today in a lawsuit against Tesla. NPR's Joel Rose reports a case stems from a crash that happened in Florida in 2019.
Tesla has been sued before when its cars are involved in crashes, but it's rare for a jury to consider arguments about the driver assistance technology that the company calls autopilot. The case centers on a crash near Key Largo, Florida, more than 6 years ago, when a Tesla slammed into a parked SUV, killing a 22-year-old woman and critically injuring her companion. The driver of the Tesla had engaged autopilot, which can steer and brake the car on its own. But in this case, it did not. Lawyers for the victims accused Tesla of exaggerating what the technology can do. Tesla is expected to argue that the driver is at fault because he wasn't paying attention to the road. Joel Rose, NPR News.
This is NPR News.
Good afternoon, or good morning, with the latest from the GBH Newsroom. I'm Henry Santoro. 9 people dead, 30 others hospitalized following a devastating fire at an assisted living facility in Fall River last night. Fire was reported about 9:30 p.m. Firefighters arrived to find people hanging out of windows hoping to be rescued. Fall River Police Chaplain Father Rob Nemkovich is among those helping the survivors. He says it's been a rough several hours.
It's a very difficult morning in the city of Fall River, and people are doing as best they can, but praying for them.
Fall River Police issued a statement saying officers entered the building and carried out some patients who were unable to walk. Fall River EMS took several injured people to area hospitals. Fire departments in surrounding communities also provided mutual aid. The Gabriel House on Oliver Street in Fall River, home to about 70 people. A family reunification center has been set up at St. Anne's Hospital in the chapel. Police ask that anyone who goes there looking for information to enter through the emergency department of the hospital. And today is the deadline for several cities and towns in Massachusetts to come into compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. And while most municipalities have approved new zoning plans, 14 have yet to do so. Mass Live reports that while some communities have until the end of the year to comply, most of the 177 cities and towns included under the law have until today to implement new zoning that allows for multifamily housing. 81 degrees, this is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the William T. Grant Foundation, supporting research to improve the lives of young people. Online at wtgrantfoundation.org. And listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
I'm Andrea Cabral.
Welcome to the 11 o'clock hour of BPR on GBH and NEPM. I'm Boston Globe business columnist Shirley Leung with former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety Andrea Cabral, filling in for Jim Browdy and Margery Egan today. They're back tomorrow at the BPL. We're streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning, Shirley. We find ourselves back at BPR once again.
The estrogen surge,
It
right?
is the estrogen surge. Yes, we are going to start today with a listener call-in segment on immigration. This is really kind of remarkable. Poll numbers out of Gallup show that President Trump's immigration and deportation policy is finally backfiring in public opinion. Bigly. It took Trump just 7 months to squander the Republican-led support for an immigration crackdown that helped propel him to the Oval Office a second time. Now, after scenes on the streets of cities right here in Massachusetts and across the country, just 35% of Americans, just 35% across the political spectrum, approve of his handling of immigration. We've all seen the videos of Rumeysa Ozturk being grabbed off a street in Somerville in broad daylight, the chaotic arrest in Worcester, the raids on farm workers in Western Mass. The administration has been claiming, and it should come as no surprise that this is a lie, that they're targeting dangerous criminals, but numbers show a very different story. Data collected by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement themselves show that a whopping 71% of detainees have no criminal convictions. 71%. 877-301-8970 is the number to call or text. These new poll numbers show even Republicans are starting to support immigration. Has the cruelty of Trump's policies finally seeped into American consciousness? What do you make of the shift in public opinion, and will anything change in America? Again, let us know. 877-301-8970. You can call or text. So, Shirley, what do you think?
Well, I'm so glad that Americans, a record high number of Americans are supporting immigration now. And it's, I think they just see that these policies are devastating and people are living in fear. Immigrants are living in fear. Even people who are here legally are living in fear. They're just scared that they just might be snatched off the streets. I mean, when you look at this statistic is incredible that most of the detainees don't have criminal records. I mean, that
was always, in my view, that was always the plan. If you listen to Stephen Miller, it was always clear what they were after. They're after changing the demographic, that demographic shift that's coming in 2036, keeping, and it's only immigrants from certain countries because obviously we're encouraging immigration from white supposed refugees from South Africa. But the breakdown between Democrats and Republicans is still very wide. It's something like 91% of Democrats and a huge majority of independents believe that immigration is right and appropriate. Clearly, a lesser number of Republicans believe that. But to your point, being able to see the fear in our neighbors, going to work, walking to the bus stop and seeing armed masked people pull up and pull people off the street is something that Americans don't experience every day. Yeah, I mean, it's really frightening. I mean, you and I were talking earlier. I just feel like when someone is late for an appointment, and I was thinking, I hope they're not detained by ICE. That you even have to think that is astonishing. No, it's absolutely right. And also, the deporting people to countries that they're not even from, and fighting in the courts. Our own Department of Justice is fighting for the right to deport people to countries where they will be tortured or murdered. And is flouting judicial orders. So, that where judges are saying, no, you cannot, people are entitled to due process. I think it's a combination of things. People are seeing the illegality of it, the unconstitutionality of it, the anti-democratic or anti-democracy nature of it, and also feeling that it is only a hop, skip, and a jump until you start taking this out on people who are actual citizens, like the president calling to revoke the citizenship of someone like Rosie O'Donnell,
right?
Which is just insane. But yeah, people are seeing that and reacting to it.
I mean, I think the media is actually, I know, tooting our own horn here, but I think the media has done a great job at keeping this on the spotlight, focused on who's being taken away. I mean, here in Boston, it's it's graduate students.
Right.
It's a high school student,
exercising their First Amendment rights. People on their way to work who've been paying taxes, regardless of whether or not they're documented. People who are here on visa programs, political asylum programs.
That's right.
People who've gone the right way, and whether they're undocumented fully or not. Just this idea that your child can be going to high school and get pulled over because he's driving his father's car,
right,
and they'll break the back window or break the windshield and drag them out.
And what was unbelievable is that they know that they had made a mistake, and he was there for a week.
Right.
A high school kid was there for a week.
Right.
It was incredible.
Right. Where do you want to go?
Let's go to Valerie in Springfield.
Hi, Valerie.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Fine, thank you. I come from a very recent immigrated family. My mother came from Europe, and my grandparents on my father's side came from Europe, and they all had to immigrate legally with papers, and they had to go to night school to learn English. That's where my grandparents met each other. And I feel like people would get and I've also seen a lot of people getting into vans late at night from Chinese restaurants and from farms, the places that they live on farms. It's just not suitable for people to be being used that way. So my feeling is that the immigrants that are coming in now aren't being used properly by the businesses, and that's the bigger problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the call, Valerie. Well, Shirley and I were talking about this before we came on, and hopefully some of our other callers will recall this and weigh in. We were talking about the era that used to be called compassionate conservatism. We'll probably talk a little bit more about it later on in the show. But when Republicans were all for immigration and establishing a process that people could access this country legally, but also once here and once working, what might have some protections versus under constant threat of deportation. So, to your point, we actually used to be a country where Republicans cared about that, not so much anymore.
Well, the poll also showed that, not only were more Americans pro-immigration, but they also wanted more pathways. They wanted those who are undocumented now. They wanted more pathways to citizenship because they're here now,
right? And
we need the workforce. So, to Valerie's, point. She's right. You don't want people being, working, workers without rights.
Right.
We don't want that either. But they're here now, and so there's got to be a way to a pathway for citizenship for them to pay, their fair share of taxes as well, and they want to work, and we need that workforce,
which is what we used to do. So Peter from Rehoboth is texting us. He says, for a lot of people, they're just not being directly affected. Immigration is just a concept until it affects them directly. Shirley and I were talking about this as well, Peter. And then they have a problem with it because now it's their neighbor that they see is, no longer safe in the world and is being targeted. It's finally at home. They go to a store. They wait in long lines because people are not, no longer free to go to work. Peter says, as an Hispanic and Black man, I've long supported immigration. I'm glad now that my white counterparts are finally starting to see that immigrants are key to our society.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think, and I'm hoping that people who aren't immigrants here, that they see this the spotlight right now is on these deportations. They feel like illegal deportations. But I hope that spotlight doesn't go away. I hope people don't forget. And so I'm curious to see what's going to be like at the end of the year, if it's going to be like a lot of things, or if it's going to be front and center, or people are like, I can't deal with this anymore. I don't want, it's not affecting me. I don't want to think about it
because there's always
anymore.
a method to the madness. What is being done to undocumented people is a step in a process towards subjugating
That's right.
people who are citizens. Where do you want to go?
Let's talk to Catherine on the line.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, I'm calling from Chelmsford. I saw those figures too, and I wanted to say that I'm terrified not only for the people that are already, deported, not just deported, but, in those detention camps. I'm 74 years old, and I was naturalized at the age of 9 when my family came from Europe. I'm kind of scared, frankly, because you can't help feeling. He's talking about taking away Rosie O'Donnell's citizenship, and she was born here. I wasn't born here. And it terrifies me that I'm going to protest every month. I have a sign in my front yard. I'm terrified that, if they decide, well, we'll just take your citizenship away. You weren't born here anyway. And I think there's a lot of other people in this country in the same situation who were not born here, but are been living here almost all their lives. And that's terrifying.
Yeah. We are hearing more and more. Thank you for your call, Catherine. We're hearing, more and more from people who, up till very recently, felt pretty comfortable in their own status. Had a visa. We're here under asylum. We're naturalized citizens, and that encroaching fear tells you is probably one of the biggest indicators, Catherine, about what's really going on. What you're feeling is legitimate, and there's a reason to be fearful, and you shouldn't have to be. We appreciate your call.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for the good call. My husband was born in South Korea, and so he's naturalized citizen. And I think just a few years ago, he was looking for his own documentation, and so he went to the trouble of tracking it down, talking to his mom, and he's like, "I'm so glad I have my papers now," because he didn't really have proof,
Right.
even though he's been here, probably 50 years now.
But as an American, generally, it's not something that you think of. There are undocumented people who've been here for years and years and years, and people always forget how much in billions and billions and billions in taxes undocumented people pay. And they've just been going to work and raising their families and not really thinking about it. Certainly people who were born here or naturalized haven't been thinking about it. To have to think about it now should be a really big red flag to people. And I'm not sure that we're there yet, but the poll numbers seem to suggest that we're getting there.
Do we have time for one more call before the break?
Sure.
Let's Sam in Lincoln.
Hi, Sam.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I want to offer a cautionary tale, the story of my mom. She was born in Vienna in 1924, and she left Vienna in 1939 after the secret police came into her apartment, grabbed my grandfather out of the apartment, put him in a jail cell for 2 weeks. She got out. She emigrated thanks to the kinder transport to London. My grandparents were not so lucky. They were both put in, I guess you could call them detention camps. Some people call them concentration camps. But in any event, they died in the concentration camps. So the only thing that we can do to stop this is go out in the streets now. Because if you don't, they'll keep doing it more and more. That's what happened in Germany. That's what could happen in our country.
Absolutely right. Thank you for the call, Sam. It's true. It's true. And silence is complicity.
And I have been seeing people protesting every weekend. which is, I mean, it's not just, once a month on the Common, but you see them.
Right.
You see them. You see them on corners and in the suburbs. I mean, it's actually terrific, and you see the signs. I mean, I was driving through Vermont, and over the weekend, and there were signs all over up there as well. So it's good that people are protesting, and I think that is the only way that
the statistic is 5% of the population raises their voices and demands to be heard and demands change happens.
We're getting some texts. Let's see. How about Kevin from New Hampshire? He says, I'm definitely no Trumper, but I have to say our immigration system has been broken for decades and desperately needs to be fixed. Unfortunately, we have a huge border with a country that has many incentives to kick their own citizens out.
Well, it's true that we allowed the immigration system to be broken. And I always think this was a means to an end because it's easier to scapegoat. Once you let something become broken and the federal government doesn't do its job, then you can scapegoat those people and say that they are the causes of all evils. Think of what would happen if this had been taken away as a topic of conversation or blame or grievance if we had just done what we should have done, making the pathways available, right, encouraging legal immigration. We could have done this decades ago and we wouldn't have this as an issue. But now it is an issue, and it's a Trojan horse for all of the other things that are happening in the country.
All right, you want to read this anonymous texter? Disagrees with me?
Why don't we take the break first? Should we take the break now?
Oh, we still
got we got a few more minutes. Okay, so there's a texter that says, the media is sensationalizing. I wonder why you want me to read this one. The media is sensationalizing certain citizens rather than telling the whole truth. They are not undocumented. They're here illegally and broke the law. Keep deporting them all. Well, if you're really proud of that opinion, maybe you shouldn't be anonymous. Maybe you should tell us what your name is. But more to the point, you're not reading the actual truth in the news. Over 3,000 is the number that they're supposed to meet, that Immigration and Customs Enforcement is supposed to meet. 3,000 deportations, I think it might be a day at this point.
It is a day. That is the goal.
Which is completely insane. This isn't just about being here illegally or breaking the law. And by the way, the guy that put this policy in place is a convicted felon. And so don't text me and tell me that you have a problem with people because they broke the law, because you don't have a problem with the president who broke the law. But more importantly, that we are a nation of immigrants. Most of the people who have been here and are citizens were born here, or their grandparents were born here. There are people in pretty much everybody's family who came here at one point or another, probably not the right way. But we weren't always a country that vented our spleen at them. Mm-hmm. That's the difference. So, all I have to say to keep deporting them all is, you have every right to be xenophobic or racist or whatever it is that you are. You have the right to do that. But this nonsense that somehow these people are somehow deserving of this treatment, especially when you're being lied to about who is actually being deported. The lie was we're only going to deport people who are a danger to our public safety. That's not what's happening. And the numbers show it. 71% don't have criminal convictions. This is simply deporting people that this administration does not want in this country. So you can feel however you want to feel about them, but this, highfalutin notion that you're on the moral high ground because these people have broken the law when your president is a convicted felon just doesn't walk with me. Mm. See, that's why you can't ask me to respond to certain texts, because this is what you get. I'm really sorry, but that's what it is.
All right, we've got. I think we have one more call. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. I thought it was like 11:21 is the break, but it's 11:27 because the 7 looks like a 1.
Oh, okay, all right.
In my chicken scratch notes here, we actually do have one more time for one more call from Josh.
Hi, Josh.
Hey, thanks for taking my call, y'all. Nice to hear your voices.
Good to hear you.
Hey, so, it's more of like I've had it. I think with this administration's attempt to soft launch bombastic ways of dealing with a newly synthesized version of what they deem as a citizen. Now I'm hearing that, like, J.D. Vance is talking about how, if your family didn't fight in the Civil War, you're not deemed a citizen enough to be claim to say.
Wow, I haven't heard that one.
Freaking people! What is up with these people? A man whose family lived on food stamps is actively trying to take away food stamps from everybody. I've just
exactly right.
That's right.
That's exactly what's happening, Josh. Yeah, you keep moving. I think the goal is, not to make a pun, but the goal is to move the goalposts.
Mm-hmm.
The goal is to keep, winnowing down and winnowing down and winnowing down who should be a have and who should be a have-not, and that's what all of this, in my view, is going toward. We appreciate the call, Josh. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I often think about my parents who immigrated from, Hong Kong and Taiwan in the early 70s. I think they were one of the kind of that wave of immigrants from Asia after, when President Nixon was in the office. And I often wonder, would they come to the U.S. today? Because in the last decade, it seems like immigrants aren't welcome, or they make life very incredibly difficult to stay here. And so, but I often wonder if they would have come.
It makes a mockery of the Statue of Liberty.
It does.
It's a symbol of this country.
It does. All right, we're going to take a quick break here. More of your calls and texts after this quick break. I'm Boston Globe columnist Shirley Leung, in for Margery Egan, and she's here with Andrea Cabral. She's the former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety, in for Jim Browdy. You're listening to BPR and GBH and NEPM, and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
I'm Marco Werman. The World's Newsroom brings you the big picture stories and some other stuff.
The whole of Niagara Falls is ripping over my right shoulder. As an ice climber, it's the largest, wildest thing I could think of climbing, and it's never been climbed. So I'm really happy to have had the opportunity to go and stick an ice tool into it.
Join us and hear the world.
This afternoon at 3, here on GBH News 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you.
And the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, helping families overcome the college planning stress. Committed to providing trusted guidance with calculators, step-by-step videos, and more. Details at mefa.org. And Mass General Brigham, their leading heart and vascular specialists, are committed to providing breakthrough care to patients with cutting-edge research and innovative treatments. Learn more at massgeneralbrigham.org/heart.
Welcome back to BPR on GBH and NEPM. I'm Andrea Cabral with Shirley Leung. We're both in for Jim Browdy and Margery Egan. They're going to be back tomorrow at the BPL, and we're streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about the new poll numbers showing massive change in public opinion over the president's deportation policies. Where do you stand? Give us a call or text us at 877-301-8970. Again, that's 877-301-8970. Shirley, just to give people some context, in my own personal background, I represent the three major experiences that people have coming to this country. So on my mother's side, I am Native American and Black American, representing the original inhabitants and caretakers of the land, Native Americans. And I say caretakers because they never felt as though they owned it. They always felt that they were there to take care of it. And also Black American, which people who were enslaved and forced to come here. And on my father's side, I'm Cape Verdean. So his parents emigrated here over nearly a century ago.
Oh, wow.
So it's all three experiences, immigration, enslavement, and being forced to come here, and also being part of the original inhabitants of the country. So my perspective is a little bit unique, maybe not as unique as one might think. There are probably a lot of people that fall into the same category. So this idea, I mean, to Native Americans, everybody's here legally, right?
Right.
So it's really a matter of perspective.
Right.
The fact that, your ancestors may have come here a long time ago and stolen that land from someone else, or forced them off of it, or killed them to take it, doesn't exactly put you in the position to stand here, I don't care how many years later, and say that other people don't have a right to come here for a better life.
I mean, we're still a land of many immigrants. I mean,
yes.
Right? Everybody has an immigrant
it's supposedly
story.
part of what makes us great, not
That's
under
right.
the current motto, but what makes us great.
And it's not just, it's the constant flow of immigrants that have also made us unique, innovative, especially here in Boston at our universities. And so I hope that, I mean, the fear now is that the immigrants are under so much threat that they don't want to come here anymore.
Right. Oh, I think we're going to see the fallout from that a lot.
Yes.
And we're going to see the impact of that and the brain drain that comes from that. Targeting international students at colleges and universities. People aren't really making the connection yet between that brain power, that innovation, that creativity, that desire to ply their talents here, and the impact of that on our health, on our technology. We won't feel it for a while, but we will feel it.
We will. Let's hear from Steve from Woburn.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Adrian. How are you?
Good.
Just don't cut me off. Let me make my point. I have a solution, and I can tell you what the problem is. The problem is the Democrats always want to confuse illegal immigration with legal immigration. My mother came here when she was in the 16 years old. Didn't know how to speak English, had to have a sponsor, had to have a job. She learned English. She opened a business. She retired at 55. Okay? Brought my father over here 9 years later. The problem is nowadays the Democrats want to constantly give people money for coming here, be on welfare for their entire lives, and never get off welfare. Give them EBT, give them housing, give them, WIC, give them all these different things, but never have a limit on how long it should be. So my solution is let them come in, okay? Give them training, give them daycare, okay? But here's the key. It's going to be limited. You're going to limit it to 4 or 5 years maybe, okay? At the end of that time, you're going to be off welfare, and guess what? You have to pay every penny back that the federal government gave you, okay? Whether it's $10 a month for the rest of your life, it doesn't matter as long as you're paying it back. There was a guy that said this years ago, give a man a fish he eats today. Teach him how to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. I think that was Jesus that said that. So make them pay them back. Give them an incentive to get off welfare, not to stay on it for their entire lives. That's the solution. What do you think about that?
Well, what I think is I don't necessarily think that people are confusing legal immigration and illegal immigration. That's a matter of process and paperwork, right? So, but we have always been a country where people have come here without the proper documentation. I don't care how far back you go. It's just that we paid far less attention to it when it happened years and years ago. And part of that is because we weren't necessarily, we've had xenophobic and sort of discriminatory times, certainly in our country's history, but we didn't take an entire group of people coming here for a better life and scapegoat them for political purposes. I think that's the difference. I think if you ask most people, they would prefer that people come here legally, immigrate here legally, that they participate in the process, that they be given opportunities to work. And as I'll say it again, undocumented immigrants pay a ton of money in taxes because they do work. So this notion that everybody's coming here and they're on welfare and they're, this is everybody and they're getting everything for free, the numbers simply don't show that, Steve. They show billions and billions and billions of dollars in taxes, people working 3, 4, and 5 jobs to get ahead in this country. But notwithstanding that, I think people believe in legal immigration. What I'm taking exception to is the scapegoating and targeting of undocumented people for these political purposes and the constant infusion of hatred and grievance into our conversation, using them as targets when they're not the people who are picking everybody else's pocket. It's wealthy people who are in everybody else. Undocumented immigrants aren't taking anything away from any of us. It's people who aren't paying their fair share of taxes. That's my issue with it. So I don't have a problem with the process.
Oh, are we almost out of time?
I guess we must be out of time.
Well, Steve, thanks for the call. All right, well, we're out of time. That was fast. What happened?
It was a big topic.
So coming up after this quick break, we'll speak with Michael Curry, who's zooming in from the NAACP annual convention in Charlotte. I'm Boston Globe business columnist Shirley Leung. I'm in for Margery Egan. She's the former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety, Andrea Cabral. She's in for Jim Braude. You're listening to BPR on GPH and NEPM and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
I'm Jared Bowen. Today on The Culture Show, Chelsea Handler, outrageous and honest in her comedy, doesn't hold back in her latest memoir, I'll Have What She's Having. It's a collection of hilarious and heartfelt essays that detail what it took for her to become the woman she always wanted to be. And it might have all started at age 10 when she turned her lemonade stand into a hard lemonade stand. That and more on The Culture Show today at 2 on 89.7 GBH.
Support for GBH comes from you.
And the Peabody Essex Museum, presenting Knowing Nature, Stories of the Boreal Forest. Captivating photos and interactive displays take visitors inside a vast wilderness. Opens July 26th, PEM.org. And M&M Skylights, located in Stoneham, installing and servicing the full range of Velux skylights that can help bring air and more natural light into your home. Skylight consultations can be scheduled at mmskylights.com.
Welcome back to BPR on GPH and NEPM. I'm Andrea Cabral with Shirley Leung. We're in for Jim Braude. Now, yeah, that's what we're going to call them
That's
now.
a good one. Braude. I like that.
We're in for Jim Braude and Margery Egan. They're back tomorrow with the BPL, and we're streaming live at youtube.com/GBH News. We are now joined on Zoom by Michael Curry. You know him as the CEO of the Mass League of Community Health Centers. He's also on the board of the National NAACP. He joins us today from the NAACP annual convention, which is this year is in Charlotte, North Carolina. Michael, it's good to see you. Long time no see.
Hi, Michael.
Good to see you both. Good to see you, Shirley. Good to see you, Andrea. Pleasure to be with you. So I stepped out of sessions, and I'm glad to have this conversation with you.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you.
So how's the convention? Are there 10,000 attendees? And did it just start? What's the mood like there?
Yeah, so one is I think, it's interesting because of all the stressors, right? All the things that is happening out of the federal government that is stressing most of Americans, I'd say, around policy. I think it's good to be in community with people who are also not only stressed about it, but are also activists and working to address it, right? They're on the ground. They're the boots on the ground in cities and towns across this country in 2,200 units across this country doing the work of civil rights. So it's good to be in community with that audience. And I'll tell you, I just left a session with Angela Rye, Congressman Benny Thompson, and others talking about this moment we're in. And they give a sobering message, but they also give a message of if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? In historical context. So people are hitting home that this is not new. We've been here before. We had sitting Supreme Courts who had decisions that were destructive to democracy and to the equity and equality of human America. A president in the White House who also carries a message that is and a policy that is adverse to inclusion and democracy. It's just a reminder that this is not new.
So, Michael, it's kind of interesting. I don't know whether or not you can answer this, whether or not Trump has ever been to an NAACP convention. This year, the NAACP did not invite him to the convention. I want you to talk a little bit about that, but also talk a little bit about, we talked about this when the National Black Journalists invited Trump, I think it was last year, and they got more than what I think they bargained for, because it was sort of the tradition to invite the president. So talk a little bit about the NAACP's decision, and also talk, if you can, about this notion, this idea that we feel like we have to cling to certain traditions and protocol, even in circumstances where it's time for us to turn away from those things, to make different decisions, and thereby make statements about, why we would invite the president to an annual convention like this in the first place, and what it is he's doing or not doing that should cause us to change our minds about that decision. Like, we have this thing about tradition, and I want you to talk from your perspective about why we need to stop looking at the office of the president as we look at the president. We're conflating those two things, and I think we should stop.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. I think so. If folks don't know, I have the honor and distinction of chairing the National Board's Advocacy and Policy Committee. So Andrea and Shirley, every issue that comes before the NAACP policy related comes to the committee that I've chaired at least for the last 7-8 years, maybe more. And that committee takes up these meaty issues in housing, education, healthcare, and so forth. And those chairs of all those various committees sit at the table with me as a part of advocacy and policy. I also am a member of the legal committee of the NAACP. So we meet to talk about the legal issues. So to answer your question directly, it is unprecedented for us not to invite a sitting president. We have done that in the history of this organization. We're at the 116th convention of the National Association, the nation's largest, boldest, baddest, most storied civil rights organization in the history of this country, and arguably in the world. And to make a decision and not invite a sitting president, I'm here long enough as a member of the NAACP that I've been here for Bush to visit. Though I wasn't in agreement with his policies, we were here to hear him present and talk about issues related to the things that we care about. I was here when Mitt Romney, the candidate, came and spoke more than once. I was here when Obama spoke, and when so many others that were sitting presidents, Biden spoke. And the goal is to make sure that presidents, even if you're not ideologically aligned or politically aligned with what they're saying, you want them to come and speak to the audience. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan. We want to hear from you. To make this decision regarding Trump is unprecedented. And of course, as Derek Johnson, our president and CEO, said, he said that this president has signed constitutional executive orders that oppress voters, undo federal civil rights protections, illegally turn military on our communities, and he continually undermines every pillar of our democracy. This is unprecedented times, and I think that decision by the NAACP was unprecedented, that we can't condone and create space similar to what the journalist did. He made that a spectacle. He contorted and twisted the truth around what happened at that event. He wasn't coming anyway because he doesn't respect civil rights. He doesn't respect the work of this organization. But I think it was a statement by the NAACP to say what you're doing is not acceptable. It's not normal. It shouldn't be acceptable, and we shouldn't become weathered to it. And therefore, we're not inviting you to come and address the thousands of delegates that are here.
I'm glad you guys did it. It was the right thing to do. I mean, especially what happened last year at the National Association of Black Journalists. I mean, that was the convention where Trump questioned whether Kamala Harris is black, right?
Right. He did it at that convention, but he'd been doing it for quite a while.
It was incredible.
Distraction.
It was horrible, horrifying.
And you know, when you come to these conferences and you have speakers, and we've heard some phenomenal speakers, you want to have an intelligent conversation. You want to talk policy. For you to be attacking the race of a sitting a candidate for president is disturbing, insulting, and it was a distraction. That wasn't an intelligent conversation. I think the journalists who were there that day found themselves and their effort undermined because he degraded that forum.
So, what are leaders at the convention talking about in terms of how, given what the Trump administration is, we're only 7 months into the administration. On day one, he was signing executive orders rolling back DEI. What are leaders talking about in terms of how to stand up to Trump and what he's doing to civil rights?
Well, I'll tell you, the legal conversations here and the session I just left with Benny Thompson and Representative Yvette Clarke and others was really focused on a lot of things, but the attack on the 14th Amendment was a critical one. Birthright citizenship and its implications for African Americans was a key part of that conversation. And we gotta, and I'm gonna use, old school hip hop terms. Like, we can't fall for the okie doke. That sometimes we think these broader issues that are not immediately directly related to us don't have a consequence for us. But we have to keep our eyes on the ball. And when you attack some of the settled law and when you attack the 14th Amendment and now you have revisionist or new interpretations of the law, that can be weaponized in ways that hurts communities. And we are worried about birthright citizenship. We're worried about the gutting, attacking on Medicaid. We know, and I say this, Andrea, previously to you, 49 million Americans did not have insurance before the Affordable Care Act. 49 million. That means that when they had a pain in their side or their mental health was compromised or their eyes or their teeth, or they had a substance use disorder, they could not go in for care in a preventive way. They had to go in for care in the emergency room, the most expensive setting. And chances are that disease, that illness was more progressed at that point. We cannot allow all that progress to cover people, to provide them with a medical home and a primary care provider to be eroded with this Medicare decision by the Trump administration. And it will be. Because they've won, right? They've gotten that legislation passed through Congress, shame on Congress. And now millions of Americans will lose access to coverage, and we will all pay for it. Not just Democrats, not just Massachusetts, not just urban, but rural, Republican, MAGA will pay the consequence when their insurance costs go up, when their waiting times are longer at emergency rooms. I always say it, pay now or pay greater later, and we chose not to pay now.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about this now because the sort of running theme for the show is about the inaptly named Big Beautiful Bill and its impacts. And we're about to do a really deep dive with Jon Gruber at a really granular level, and I hope people tune in for it, about the actual impacts and the mechanisms by which they're getting ready to victimize millions and millions and millions of people. But can you talk about, as the head of the Mass League of Community Health Centers, can you talk about the impact of these cuts in both Medicaid cuts and programmatic cuts for things like SNAP, which is going to take some 23 million people across the country off of supplemental nutritional assistance, the impact of those cuts in Massachusetts and how we can blunt possibly some of the impact of that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's so overwhelming.
It is. I can't really wrap. That's why I need to talk to Jon Gruber because I'm having trouble wrapping my head around it.
It is so overwhelming because I think when you think about the many implications of this, so one is when you cut access to Medicaid, and I just talked to our phenomenal Medicaid director in Massachusetts, Mike Levine, this morning. I've been in touch with Robbie Goldstein, our Department of Public Health Commissioner, our new Secretary of Health and Human Services as of this week, Kiami Mahania, formerly of Lynn Community Health Center. We're all huddling, even in the hospital health center community, the advocates with Healthcare for all huddling to try to assess what the implications are. What we do know is that more people will be subject to these work requirements, and that work requirements will be rolled out. We know that most people already work, and that those who don't work have a reason why they're not working and are in need of Medicaid coverage. We know that if you put in place work requirements, you're basically creating an administrative hurdle that we've seen in other states with work requirements will drive people off of coverage. Now, I know all of you who listen this morning know that you know your own administrative complexity when you try to call an agency, the Registry of Motor Vehicles, your insurance provider, name it, whatever that entity is, the voicemails, the questions, the forms you might not fill out, and then you end up losing coverage. And if we're talking seniors, we're talking people dealing with chronic illnesses, we're talking about people who are vulnerable, poor, housing insecure, it is inevitable that they will lose coverage and they will end up being sicker and not getting the care in the right place, the right time that they need it. So we are going to pay a price for work requirements. That's going to be in Massachusetts as well. And then the restrictions
and it's every 6 months. You have to re-up this every 6 months. That's the big, huge problem.
Yeah, we call it redetermination, right? Wow. So it's the whole notion that you have to go through the process to revalidate or to validate that you are qualified for a program. To do that as frequently as this administration is planning to do it in the years to come is really intentional. They want to drive more people is under this banner of fraud, waste, and abuse. And you've heard them say, well, we're not going to touch Medicaid.
Right.
This is touching Medicaid.
Yeah.
This is hurting Republicans. This is hurting rural communities. This is hurting rural hospitals. And as they cut resources to even states like Massachusetts that relies on Medicaid dollars to have the programs and services we do, they're going to cut resources coming to states like Massachusetts and many others. And we will have to make some pretty hard decisions around how we balance budgets and continue to provide the programs and services that we believe in. So I think, to your point, Andrea, we have a really tough next few years to go through. And then the other thing, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. In this country, and I remind people all the time, if you are listening to this show and you're Irish, Italian, Jewish, or Polish, Russian, and you came to this country for a land of better opportunity, they didn't want you here either. And they also said that you were bringing disease and you were bringing crime and you were a weight on the American system. And they were putting policies and practices in place to keep you from coming here too. So how shame on us that we're now going after immigrants, and in this case, undocumented immigrants, to now drive them off of programs and services. That's disturbing because this the American way is that people come in for opportunity. They come into a land of opportunity. Maybe they of course they work, they raise their families, and we are now putting a chokehold on their housing, on their health care, on their education, and driving them out of this country. There will be economic implications of driving this tremendous workforce that we rely on out of our communities.
Michael, can you talk a little bit about what Massachusetts is doing or what your community health centers are doing to ensure that during this more onerous redetermination process that more people can stay on health care?
Yeah, so this is the tough part. I just met with my members. We had a little bit of a town hall meeting with the leaders of our health centers on Friday. We'll provide some updates. We are now, and I'm going to use this analogy, and it's accurate. We're now in a COVID state of emergency. Wow. So for any of us in healthcare that knew that during that time we were having daily huddles, weekly meetings, responding to crises in moments and having to pivot and respond to issues in policy and regulations and in conditions, we're now back at that point with federal policy that we'll now need to meet regularly to figure out what the implications of all this is. And what I've told my members is, one, we know that we are on the front lines of patient navigation, benefit direction for patients who are trying to figure out whether they have Medicaid or can get Medicaid, how to navigate the commercial insurance if they have Blue Cross or Point 32, whatever insurance they have. We're often the front line to giving them the information they need. We're going to have to do that again, and we don't have the resources to do that. We don't have the staffing to do that. We're already stretched thin in finances, but we're going to have to find a way, hopefully with the help of the state government. So when redetermination does come around, Shirley, and our parents and uncles and aunts and our children walk into those health centers, we can say, hey, come sit with us. We're going to walk you through what the coverage is, how the work requirement works, how we can make sure that you stay covered and get the care that you need. It puts a tremendous strain on our system, and a strain that was intentional. And we have to meet that moment to make sure here in Massachusetts, people don't go without care.
And when will redeterminations begin? I mean, will we feel this immediately, or we still got 6 months or a year?
So redeterminations already happened, right? We stalled them during COVID, but the frequency of them has all been changed by this big bill. I won't even use that term. This one big bill.
Big ugly bill, I think is what people talk. Big ugly bill.
I didn't want to say that word, but I'll just say that one big bill is really going to hurt folks, and it's going to require more frequent redeterminations. My team is combing through the language. I'll get a briefing later this afternoon. I believe it's the 2027, the beginning of 2027, that will be under the weight of these new policy changes, and then we'll have to respond. And one quick technical point: most states don't have an automatic redetermination process. It's expensive to do it. Massachusetts doesn't have an automatic process. It's a very manual process for the most part. This is going to be very challenging on how you do renewals when you don't have an automatic process. It will lead to hundreds of thousands of people in Massachusetts losing coverage in a state that is 98% insured at this moment that we're on this call.
Well, I think one of the saving graces, we could say this about the Trump administration's in sequence, is their incompetence in implementing any of the needlessly cruel and horrible things they try to do. When it comes time to actually implement it, they tend to be incompetent. But we've only got about a minute left. But Jon Gruber, one of the things that Jon Gruber, I think, is going to talk about in the next segment is how NGOs and nonprofits and regular people can mobilize to educate the public and recipients of Medicaid and these benefits as to how to master their paperwork. Can you just give us, in the last few seconds we have, your view on making this a grassroots effort to educate people?
Yeah, that's the message here at the conference, that we all have a role to play across the country, and as nonprofit organizations, as NGOs, we can do that. I would remind people that tomorrow at the legislature, at the Massachusetts State House, is a hearing on the Health Equity Compact bill, an act to advance health equity. It will be heard tomorrow in the committee at the state legislature. So please come out. There's a rally in the morning, and then there's the bill hearing tomorrow. That being said, yes, we need every single person in the sound of this conversation today to feel like you have a responsibility to reach out to family members, to neighbors, to friends, to colleagues, to residents, and share with them the information on how to navigate this very difficult policy environment we're in. I don't think it's just nonprofits. I think it's every individual with a conscience who want people to have access to coverage and services. And I think that role that nonprofits play, we've always played. We always meet the moment. We'll do it again.
Thank you, Michael.
I like that ending.
Thank you.
Everybody be empowered, right? And you can make a difference. Meet the moment. So we've been speaking with Michael Curry. He's the CEO of the Mass League of Community Health Centers, on the board of the national NAACP. He's joined us today from the convention in Charlotte, North Carolina. Michael, thanks for joining us. The show continues here in Boston, but we say goodbye to you listening on NEPM. But make sure to tune in to the fabulous 413 starting at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Coming up after the noon news on 89.7 GBH, we'll speak with MIT economist Jon Gruber more on the big bill, and this is more on Trump-era health policy, plus food policy analyst Corby Kummer and more. I'm Boston Globe business columnist Shirley Leung, in for Margery Egan. She's former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety Andrea Cabral, in for Jim Braude, and you've been listening to BPR on GBH and NEPM.
It's not over yet. More smart conversation about community issues up ahead with Jim Braude and Margery Egan on Boston Public Radio, right after a news update from NPR. Stay with us here on GBH 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you.
And the Cape Playhouse in Dennis Village. Audiences can experience the lavish elegance and mystery of Anastasia the Musical, now playing. Tickets at capeplayhouse.com. In Ethiopia, 3 women navigate hope and change as a Chinese industrial zone transforms their country. Watch POV, made in Ethiopia. Tonight at 10 on GBH2.
You're listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston. Online at gbhnews.org. GBH News. What matters to you?
I'm Andrea Cabral, in for Jim Browdy. Ahead on hour number 2 of BPR, we'll start with MIT economics chair Jon Gruber, who was instrumental in crafting both Massachusetts health reform and President Obama's Affordable Care Act. He joins us to make sense of the Medicaid cuts triggered by President Trump's misleadingly named Big Beautiful Bill Act and what it'll mean for everyday Americans. It's a don't miss segment.
I'm Shirley Leung, in for Margery Egan. Then we'll speak with Tufts food policy analyst Corby Kummer on the best cheap eats for $20 or less. Yes, those still exist. And we'll weigh in on your daily cup of Joe and how that too will cost much more, thanks to President Trump's tariffs. All that plus our Two More Things segment next on the second hour of BPR on 89.7 GBH.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. President Trump says the U.S. is sending Patriot missiles to Ukraine to help the country defend itself against Russia's ongoing missile and drone attacks. Following his meeting at the White House a short time ago with visiting NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, Trump said allies will pay for it.
We've made a deal today where we are going to be sending them weapons and they're going to be paying for them.
Trump is also threatening to impose 100% secondary tariffs on Russia if President Vladimir Putin does not reach a ceasefire deal with Ukraine in 50 days. Trump is threatening higher tariffs on imports from some of the country's biggest trading partners. NPR's Scott Horsley reports investors so far don't appear to be too rattled.
Over the weekend, President Trump said he planned to impose tariffs of 30% on goods coming into the U.S. from both Mexico and the European Union. As with other recent tariff announcements, the effective date for the new levies is August 1st, leaving some wiggle room for adjustment before that. The muted reaction in the stock market so far suggests that investors are doubtful the president will actually follow through on his tariff threats. On Friday, the Treasury Department said the government collected $27 billion in tariff revenue in the month of June. That's 4 times the import taxes the government took in during the same month last year. Asian stocks were mixed overnight, up in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Seoul, but down in Tokyo. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
An investigation is underway into the cause of a fire at an assisted living facility in Fall River, Massachusetts last night. Local authorities say at least 9 people at the Cabral House facility died and dozens more were injured. They say firefighters arrived to find heavy smoke and flames at the front of the building and multiple people hanging out of windows hoping to be rescued. The center's website says it is temporarily closed. With more rain falling in central Texas, there is concern about more flooding. More than 160 people remain missing following the 4th of July flooding, and at least 132 individuals were killed. NPR's Frank Morris has more from Kirk County.
Heavy rains Sunday pushed up river levels and temporarily shut down the search for victims of the Independence Day flooding in Texas. The focus switched back to saving lives as first responders rescued at least 24 people near Lampasas, Texas. Search crews are back out today trying to work down a long list of missing people. A list officials admit is imprecise. Progress finding bodies is slowed to a crawl. Volunteers who numbered more than 12,000 last week are starting to ebb away, and victims still out on the river are well hidden. The raging flood mangled large trucks and buried some completely in gravel and debris. Deep water in a reservoir on the river and behind smaller dams is likely concealing more debris and bodies. Frank Morris, NPR News, Kirk County, Texas.
From Washington, this is NPR News.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. As we heard from our colleagues in Washington, an investigation is underway into the fire at a Fall River assisted living facility that claimed 9 lives last night. Reports of the fire at the Cabral House came in around 9:30 p.m. At a news conference that wrapped up not quite an hour ago, Fall River Fire Chief Jeffrey Bacon credited firefighters, police, and EMS workers for evacuating dozens of residents with limited mobility. Bacon says the loss of life could have been a lot worse.
There was a tremendous teamwork between state assets and local assets here last night that really brought the positive outcome that we had. Again, I say positive outcome wholeheartedly knowing that 9 people did not make it last night, but also knowing that that could have been 39, 49, or 59 without everybody who was here to perform the rescues and make sure that everybody was transported and treated properly.
Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey says the state is assisting officials in Fall River as the recovery plays out. And with the federal grant funding up in the air, word from Boston Public School officials is that they are not currently planning to cut staff whose programs rely on those grants. Superintendent Mary Skipper says the funding hasn't been officially rescinded and that it's in delay, and she doesn't believe it'll impact the upcoming school year or any ongoing summer programs. The news comes days after the Trump administration announced it would withhold $6 billion in congressionally approved education funding nationwide until further review. It's a balmy 83 degrees out there. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Charles Schwab, offering investors choices like full-service wealth management, advice, investing, and trading on Thinkorswim. Learn more at schwab.com. And from the Doris Duke Foundation.
Welcome back to hour number 2 of BPR, streaming at youtube.com at GBH News. I'm Boston Globe business columnist Shirley Leung with former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety Andrea Cabral. We're filling in for Jim Braude and Margery Egan today. They're back tomorrow at the BPL with NBC Sports Boston's Trenni Casey, CNN's John King, and Frontline's Michael Kirk on his latest Trump and the Rule of Law. Hello again, Andrea.
Hello again, Shirley. We are now joined on Zoom by Jon Gruber, who was instrumental in creating both the Massachusetts healthcare reform and, as Paul Krugman describes him, a founding father of the Affordable Care Act. In fact, on a day when we're talking about the big ugly bill, we probably could not be more blessed to have someone who understands the impact of this bill at such a granular level. So I'm glad he's here. President Obama's signature health care reform legislation, to be described as a founding father of that, I think, is quite something. John's also the chair of the MIT's Department of Economics, and he's a Ford professor of economics. Hi, John. Glad you're here.
Hello, Andrea and Shirley. Good to be here.
Hi, John. So you were also just on economist Paul Krugman's podcast and Substack talking about the impact of this big bill on healthcare. So maybe you could dive into, Andrea and I learned a lot listening to the podcast just about the impact on Medicaid, what exactly it's going to do to Medicaid. So maybe we could start there. And it seems like that's the source of a lot of concern is about the gutting of Medicaid, right?
That's absolutely right. And look, I think it's very important to remember how people here in Massachusetts are truly the founding fathers of healthcare reform, from Governor Romney to the leaders of the legislature, to activists like John McDonough, to people like John Kingsdale, who ran the Connector Board. There's a lot of people who can share credit for making healthcare reform a success here in Massachusetts, which really was the reason it became national. So I think the state can be very proud of our leadership role in that. So let's do a little primer. Let's remember that American healthcare, despite what everybody says, is about 50% public and 50% private. The biggest public program is Medicare, which is universal coverage for the elderly. The second biggest is Medicaid, which is coverage for the poor. Before the Affordable Care Act, this was limited to certain subcategories of poor people, pregnant women or children or very, very poor families. What the Affordable Care Act did was make it a universal entitlement for low-income families. So basically, if you're a family that's below 133% of the federal poverty line, so it's like $30,000, $32,000, you are entitled to Medicaid for your medical services. It's free health insurance, no cost to the individual to get health care. This was an enormous accomplishment. Really the first time I've had universal entitlement to health insurance for the poorest people in America. It was made the discretion of states. 10 states still have not taken up this option, despite the fact the federal government's paying for it out of pure maliciousness. Out of pure political malpractice and maliciousness, just because it was passed by a Democratic president. 10 states have said, no, we will not cover our poor citizens paid for by the federal government just because we're being jerks.
Right.
But nonetheless, in most of the country, this is expanded. Medicaid, the way it works is, since it's based on income, it's for low income people. They have to check if you have low income. Not everyone gets it. It's not like Medicare. Once you're over 65, you get it. And the way they do that is every year they write you a letter and they say, please verify your income. Now, this sounds pretty straightforward, except for the fact that a lot of people don't get mail. A lot of people don't read their mail. A lot of people don't understand their mail, especially those who have language barriers and especially those with mental health challenges. So every year, even in Massachusetts, although we're better than most states, we kick thousands of people off Medicaid who shouldn't be kicked off the program because this redetermination process has errors. Many of those people find their way back, many don't. What this new law would do is essentially put those hoops, those hurdles, those barriers on steroids. How would it do so? First of all, it would take it from every year to every 6 months. So now twice a year you have to jump through these hurdles, which is really not that, not only doing a lot for the program, but it's really just making it more difficult for you to be on the program. Second of all, it's setting up new barriers, in particular a work requirement, which basically says that everyone on Medicaid who's a non-disabled, non-elderly person needs to work a certain amount of hours a month to qualify for the program. Now, you might think, well, that doesn't sound terrible if they're not disabled, non-elderly. But let's remember, almost everyone in the program already does work. Okay. Indeed, there's a great chart in the New York Times that shows that only 3% of those on Medicaid are currently either not disabled or elderly or not working.
Oh, wow.
So it's a tiny share of people. But when you put in these work requirements, it's another hurdle people have to go through. So they drop off the program. Now, with this one, we actually have experience. A number of states have done this, putting these work requirements. What we found is that it's done nothing to increase work. It's just kicked many eligible people off the program. So if you add these together, the best estimate is that we're talking about 6 to 7 million people who deserve Medicaid who will be kicked off the program because of these administrative barriers. And that is just one, as I said, that's just one of 4 different ways that this program ultimately could lead to about 16 million more Americans being uninsured. This bill.
And can you explain to people, because the administration just keeps saying over and over again, which, we see them do this a lot, we're not touching Medicaid. We're not changing Medicaid. We're not taking Medicaid away. They say the same thing about Social Security and Medicare. Can you explain how that is a lie?
Look, it's a lie that has the veneer of the truth. It's a lie because it is true that they are not changing the eligibility requirements for Medicaid. No one today who is eligible for Medicaid on paper, if they're willing to fill out the requisite paperwork, would lose it. But what's false is that it's going to lead to millions of Americans losing their health insurance. And here, once again, we should believe nothing the Trump administration says ever, but we do have a truth teller in Washington, the Congressional Budget Office. They're a nonpartisan body that advises Congress on legislation, and they are the nation's economics truth teller. And they estimate that these provisions will lead about 6 million people to lose health insurance, and that all the provisions put together of what Trump's doing could lead to about 16 million people losing health insurance.
I mean, and some of the things I also learned is that a lot more people will die, right? I mean, economists have run the numbers on this, right? Or researchers have run that they will lead to about 24,000 deaths, more deaths a year, right? And then over time, it really adds up. I think in the podcast, you were talking about 250,000 people will die.
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing. There's lots of reasons why we should care about this. And let me just quickly show before I get to that, say where we get to that number, because there's 6 million people lose it. There's another set of people who are going to lose their coverage because what the government's doing is massively cutting back on the funding of the program. A number of states fund the program through essentially charges to healthcare providers that then get passed on to the government. They're going to shut those down. That CBO estimates will chase another probably 4 million people off the program because states are not going to be able to have the money to pay for them via the program.
Well, can you this is difficult to understand. Can you go slowly with this with the state provider taxes? But I want people to, because it's important.
Look, this is a great example, actually, Andrea, of what economists call the second best. What do you mean by that? This is actually a bit of an underhanded methodology that states use to finance Medicaid. What they do is they'll say so Massachusetts will go to Boston Children's, and they'll say, or go to Boston Medical Center, and let's say, look, raise what you charge to Medicaid by $1 and pay us $1 in taxes. You're indifferent, right? But the difference is that extra dollar that is paid by Medicaid is only half paid by the state. And it's half paid by the federal government. So when the hospital gets its extra dollar, 50 cents comes from Massachusetts, 50 cents comes from the feds. But the whole dollar of tax the hospital pays goes to Massachusetts. So it's a money machine. Now, this is not really a good way to make policy, to be honest. What we should do is say, look, Medicaid's underfunded. We should raise what we pay for Medicaid. But since the federal government hasn't done that, states have come to rely on what economists call a second best approach, which is these taxes. The best state of the world, we get rid of them. I agree, and we replace it with real funding of Medicaid, but we're not doing that. We're just getting rid of them. And as a result, states are going to suffer. And when states suffer, let's be very clear about another lie that the administration's perpetrating. They're saying, well, the people who suffer are the undeserving people who shouldn't be on Medicaid. What that misses is an important fact. 3/4 of the spending on Medicaid is on the elderly and disabled. 3/4.
Yeah, I was shocked by that number.
It's the primary payer for our nursing homes in Massachusetts as well as around the country. It's a primary payer for the home care that the elderly and disabled get. We cannot get rid of these provider taxes without massively cutting the services that go to our nation's elders and disabled. So this isn't, Republicans want to pitch it as, oh, this is some undeserving, quite frankly, they're having you picture some undeserving, often minority person that they want to make look evil. That's not who's getting hurt here. It's your mom and your cousin who has a severe disability. These are people who are going to suffer when they do these cuts. So let's be very clear. This is Medicaid represents a broad cross-section of Americans. Medicaid pays for almost half of all births in America. Medicaid pays for the majority of nursing home stays and home care for the elderly in America. So these are a broad cross-section of Americans who are going to suffer. At the same time, the administration is going further because they're not even satisfied with that. They're also attacking the Affordable Care Act, which, of course, Trump's been after since day one. They're attacking that in two ways. First of all, these same hoops I described you have to jump through to get Medicaid, they're adding a similar set of hoops to the Affordable Care Act exchanges. People used to get health insurance. They're making it much harder. They're having a very narrow open enrollment period, making it very hard to sign up for the program. They are cutting all the funding for people who help outreach to get people to find out about the program. So they're cutting that. That's going to kick people off the Affordable Care Act exchanges. And who's going to leave those exchanges? The healthiest people, because they're the ones who won't bother signing up. What does that do? That raises the premiums for everyone else. Meanwhile, the fourth thing they're doing is that President Biden made the Affordable Care Act exchanges much more generous. President Biden didn't. Americans should have to pay more than 8% for health insurance, 8% of their income for health insurance. They're getting rid of that. Now Americans will pay up to whatever, it could be 25% of their income for health insurance. That's going to cost people. You put that all together, and the Congressional Budget Office estimates 16 million people lose health insurance. Based on research that was done when we passed the Affordable Care Act, that could lead to about 24,000 people a year dying. And that's every year. So over a decade, that's 250,000 people.
And it's
So
two-thirds of the gains of the ACA would be lost.
Ultimately, if these numbers are right, 2/3 of the gains of the ACA would be lost. I am stunned. Remember, as I talked about in the podcast, Republicans for decades have been trying to attack Medicaid. They shut the government down over it under President Clinton. They tried to do it with repealing the ACA. They attacked Medicaid. They've never gotten away from it. Here's what's ironic. The time they got away from it is the time they paired it with a bill that's a massive tax cut for the rich. So this is the single most negatively, we call it regressive or negatively redistributive law of the last 50 years, where basically they're saying we are going to have a massive tax cut for the rich, paid for by taking health insurance away from the poor and killing Americans. It's astonishing.
And and they're using the Trojan horse of fraud, waste, and abuse. Of course, in every government program, there is some element of fraud, waste, and abuse, but they have made it a boogeyman and convinced people that with things like the Doge, which is a colossal failure, and these massive cuts, that they're making government more efficient and making government better. It's really to pay for the explosion of the deficit caused by people who don't need government and who can well afford to pay their fair share of taxes, caused by relieving them of their obligation to do so.
Andrea, that's really well put, and it shows the uphill battle that the Democratic Party faces.
Yeah.
Which everything you said is right, and everything you said is not understood by a vast share of Americans. The Trump administration is amazing. They're amazing communicators. They're amazing and the reason they're amazing at staying on message in a way the Democrats just don't. We have our butt, well, maybe. They don't have any of that. They just willfully just say, this is what we're saying, and we're saying it. So let's take the fraud, waste, and abuse example. First of all, as you pointed out, Andrea, every organization in the history of mankind features some fraud, waste, and abuse. It's not just the government, it's private companies as well. And the Medicaid program does. It's a small amount of money, okay? And we should absolutely go after it. We should be doing everything we can to go after that. But the way you go after it is not by making it harder for people to enroll in the program, especially those of language barriers and mental health challenges. And let's remember critically here, okay, who suffers? Who suffers is the kids. Because who is going to not enroll in these programs? It's going to be parents who don't have the time, who maybe don't care as much about their kids' health. The parents are healthy, they're like, whatever, my kids, I don't want to get health insurance for my kids. That's the future of America right there. So we are bankrupting this. The Trump administration is all about bankrupting the future of America, be it taking away health insurance from families that benefit kids, taking away research funding from universities and others that'll cause the scientific advances of the future. And that's a massive, massive reduction in investment in our future over the relatively small share of dollars we're losing. And let's prove it. One thing, put this to the test. Trump put Elon Musk in charge of finding all the waste and abuse, and he couldn't find any.
Right.
He saved no money.
Right.
If there really was waste and abuse, then go after it, man. That's what Trump did, and nothing came out of it. So it's really just such a false excuse.
Jon, can you bring us back to Massachusetts and talk about the impact here? I mean, I think of Massachusetts, I mean, we've world-class hospitals and healthcare here. We have a state that does put a lot of money into healthcare and spends a lot of money. And so will we feel how bad will it be here?
Well, I mean, this is, OBBB could stand for one big bad bill for Boston, because basically it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad in Massachusetts more generally, but I just can't make my clever pun then. I guess it could be Bay State, but then it's an extra S. So it's negative in so many ways. First of all, since we passed healthcare reform in before the Affordable Care Act, we have always had a more generous system for our poor citizens than the Affordable Care Act allowed. We did that by essentially topping off what the feds were contributing with state funds. With this pullback, we are now going to have to refill that gap. So essentially, the federal government and the ACA rewarded us. They said, look, you've been great innovating. We're going to help pay for some of those costs you're paying. Now they're pulling that back. So we are now going to have to spend more money to care for our least advantaged citizens. So that's a budget hit. There's the budget hit. Then on the other hand, we are an eds and meds economy. We are an economy here in Boston and Massachusetts more generally that creates jobs and grows through the education and particularly the medical sector. The medical sector is the most vibrant and largest employer in Massachusetts. We are creating jobs all up and down the skill level. It's not just jobs for the highest skilled doctors. It's jobs all the way down for service workers in hospitals and for workers in care facilities. So we are basically attacking the growth engine of the Massachusetts economy. In the meantime, we're attacking the innovation engine of the Massachusetts economy. Why is Boston considered one of America's superstar cities? It's because of our universities. is because our universities create innovations that then create jobs. There's I discuss this in my book, Jumpstarting America, with Simon Johnson. We talk about the very localized benefits of university innovation. You think, well, a university invents something that benefits the world. It does, but it's surprising how much the benefits really magnify locally. When universities create new innovation, when professional universities have good ideas, they start companies locally, and those companies employ people. Let's remember, Kendall Square in the 1970s was a dump. And I mean a dump. Literally, the city of Boston used it as a place to dump the extra snow.
Oh, I didn't know that.
From the snowstorm of the 1970s. My co-author, Simon Johnson, liked to say, he's a student at MIT in the early 80s, he used to say, Kendall Square was such a dump, you just have to leave and go to Central Square just to get mugged. Okay, it was nothing. Okay, it's now the most valuable real estate in America, or maybe second.
Right, yeah.
All because of our universities. Because our universities spun off businesses that became the core of the biotechnology revolution that is Kendall Square and Cambridge and Boston more generally. So we are putting that at risk when we cut this science funding. Okay, the attacks on Harvard have been horrible. Harvard cannot exist with these attacks going on. There's going to have to be something done. And it's sacrificing the amazing work that Harvard's done for our world in terms of promoting science and the benefits delivered to our world and to our economy.
So, Jon, you usually will have something, a positive way forward, no matter how bad the news is. Tell people what states, NGOs, nonprofits working singularly, working in concert with each other, what people as volunteers in their community centers and others can do to help maybe not blunt the impact, but to help make this less apocalyptic than it actually is.
Yeah,
or just to deal with it. It's apocalyptic, but just to be able to deal with it.
So I think, first of all, let's talk about the timing. So what they've done with the timing is in classic political fashion, and both parties are guilty of this. I'm not saying this is a Republican-only thing. They have front-loaded the benefits and delayed the cuts. So the tax cuts
after the midterms.
The cuts in Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act happen after the midterms. Now, that's not totally true, because at the end of this year, the first cut's coming in, which is, as I said, President Biden made the subsidies that make insurance affordable on the healthcare exchanges more generous. That ends at the end of this year. So right away, we are going to see in early next year a spike in the cost of buying insurance on the ACA exchanges. And you know the game book. They're going to say, the Republicans say, look, the Obamacare failed. Look how expensive health insurance is in the exchanges. And it's the role of every thoughtful person to say, wait a second, it wasn't this expensive last year. It's really expensive now. That's on you guys. That's not Obama who left office a long time ago. That's on you guys. So partly it's just staying focused in mind on what the implications of their actions are. And there's a great editorial in the New York Times, just to go a bit off subject, about when there's a drought in the Horn of Africa, USAID saved 3.5 million lives. I didn't know that. Why wasn't USAID out there saying that before they got to? We need to make sure that people recognize the pain. Second is, starting in 2026, there's going to be a massive disenrollment from the Medicaid program. There are wonderful public service organizations in Massachusetts that work on healthcare that we can turn to, nationally in Massachusetts that we can turn to help people understand their rights, to help those of us with language skills, well, not me, but others with good language skills can help immigrant groups that are suffering from not understanding this paperwork to do it. And I think, Mass Health has some time to get ready, and I hope they're doing everything they can to get the government ready and rally people to help out those who are inappropriate losing their health insurance coverage in 2026.
Well, Jon, we're out of time, but this has been a great primer on the impact of this terrible bill. We've been speaking with Jon Gruber, the chair of MIT's Department of Economics, where he's also the Ford Professor of Economics. Coming up after this quick break, avocado toast just got a lot more complicated. We'll talk with food policy analyst Corby Kummer about Trump tariffs and the new allegations of greenwashing of avocados. I'm Boston Globe business columnist Shirley Leung, in for Margery Egan. She's former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety Andrea Cabral, in for Jim Browdy. And you're listening to BPR on GBH, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
Coming up on GBH's All Things Considered, the latest on the horrific fire at an assisted living facility in Fall River that's left 9 people dead and dozens injured. WNBA star and Worcester Academy grad Aaliyah Boston is back in Massachusetts and being honored at the State House, and how scientists are looking into how to minimize some of the changes even healthy brains experience as we age. Those stories and all the day's news starting at 4 on GBH 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you.
And the Peabody Essex Museum, presenting Knowing Nature, Stories of the Boreal Forest. Captivating photos and interactive displays take visitors inside a vast wilderness. Opens July 26th. PEM.org. And the Boston Speaker Series, continuing its 2025-2026 season at Symphony Hall with 7 evenings, featuring Tipping Point author Malcolm Gladwell, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Ken Burns, and former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster. BostonSpeakers.org.
Welcome back to BPR. I'm Andrea Cabral. I'm here with Shirley Leung. We are in for Jim Braude and Margery Egan. They're both back tomorrow at the BPL. No tickets or RSVP needed. We're also streaming live at youtube.com/GBH News. We are now joined on Zoom by food policy analyst, multiple James Beard winner Corby Kummer. He's the executive director of the Food and Society Policy Program at the Aspen Institute. He's also senior editor at The Atlantic and a senior lecturer at the Tufts Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy. Hello, Corby. Good to see you.
Hi, Corby.
Good to see you, Andrea and Shirley.
Yes, it seems like every time I'm filling in, I always have Corby. This is great. I love talking about food.
Lucky me.
Hey, Corby, so we have a running theme of today's show. We've been talking about this, the quote-unquote big, beautiful bill that just got passed, and a lot of the terrible and ugly impacts of it on healthcare and on a lot of other different policies. But one thing that we want to talk to you about is about the impact on SNAP benefits. I mean, I think this is the biggest, maybe a historic cut, right, to SNAP and food benefits and food assistance. If you could talk about what kind of impact we're going to see here because of this bill.
It can be as much as a 20% cut, which is historic in a really bad way. So 22.3 million families and people could be knocked off the bill, according to an Urban Institute analysis. And the cuts are really insidious because it isn't so much outright saying, we're knocking you off. It's saying, we're greatly increasing the harassment factor of monthly paperwork to requalify. And if you don't say you're looking for work, or if you get one thing wrong, you're already working, you have no time to raise your children and keep down a job, and now we're giving you more onerous paperwork every month. You fill out one wrong box, you're off. And so there are many ways of knocking people off. There are requirements to lower the age at which you have to show that you're, lower the age, it's 55 to 64. People have to show that they're looking for work. And it's going to greatly disqualify people who are already caretaking for their parents, so it's knocking off the sandwich generation or doing their best to. And also, 6 states have, with great fanfare from the new administration, enacted requirements, no junk food, which means no sugary sodas on SNAP when you get in West Virginia and Texas and a number of other very red states. It sounds great. I and all of my food policy colleagues are really eager to see what happens to diets and reduction in calories. But what we're all very aware of, it's really a way of, again, knocking people off the rolls, because fewer stores in rural areas will think it's worth it to accept SNAP benefits because they have such an important profit margin from sugary beverages. So it's going to restrict access to fresh food. That's really what it's doing. It's not so much about improving diet. It's, again, subtly knocking people off the rolls.
We were just talking with Jon Gruber about this entirely consistent impact that this bill is going to have on Medicaid. knocking people off the Medicaid rolls by making it prohibitive for them to keep up with the redetermination process and the filling out of paperwork. So what we see here with SNAP, can you give us an idea, like he did with Medicaid, can you sort of break this down for people about who specifically within the population is going to be affected by this, who will literally be going hungry, and what's the method to the madness here? Who benefits? When these people are knocked off the rolls, explain to people why that's being done to them. Because, I mean, the cruelty is the point. It's become cliche at this point. But there is also an economic reason that the Trump administration is doing this.
The main economic reason is because there are so few ways that the Congress can cut government spending to pay for tax benefits for billionaires, which is the real point of the big, beautiful bill. It turns out that DOGE and others thought that it would be really easy to cut government spending. It isn't. So a big, fat, and very tempting target is food assistance and SNAP and Medicaid benefits. They're very expensive, and the government can enact these hurdles and roadblocks. So some of the specific people are people between the ages of 55 and 64. They're suddenly going to have to fill out monthly requirements saying that they're able-bodied adults looking for work. And also parents of children ages 14 and up. I think it was children, it was a much smaller pool of children who require, and veterans. You know, these were all exempted groups. Now they're not going to be exempted. But the larger economic point is to pay for the tax cuts.
Mm-hmm. Reading the fine print about targeting families with kids 14 and older, it just seemed insane to me. Like why even establish that as a rule? I mean, families 14 and older, their kids eat more. It's like, this is terrible. It's really, really bad.
There's absolutely no logic to it. The idea is, how can we extend requirements that were already there and look like we're being responsible because those requirements are already there for able-bodied adults who could be working, and for parents of children, we're just going to extend them a bit. And I heard the head of Combined Medicare and Medicaid Services, the chief of staff, not the head, at a conference a few weeks ago saying, this is really a way of getting people to engage more with their community. If people look for work and if people work, they're more active community members. And this is community development and supporting community. And, it was sort of breathtaking doublespeak, because what it's doing is exhausting time-hungry parents who barely can keep a job and try to feed their children.
I mean, it's also a classic example of government that hurts the people, hurts the governed, and doesn't help them. And traditionally, democracies have governments that actually help the governed. But this is good if you want to establish two stratas in this country: one, people who of enormous wealth, and two, the people who have to work for them or fall at their mercy in order to put food on the table. If that's the two stratas you want to establish, this will do it.
It's really about community development, Andrea. Let's not forget.
We want to talk about another Trump policy. This is tariffs, and on again, off again tariffs. And the latest round or potential is tariffs on Brazil. And in your world, it could leave a big impact on coffee drinkers. Talk about kind of Brazil and coffee. And I actually didn't realize how much coffee comes from Brazil.
So it is my world, because I spent 3 years writing a book called The Joy of Coffee, which, so coffee is a very big part of my life. So 99% of the coffee Americans consume is grown in South America, Africa, and Asia. And a huge amount is in Brazil. Prices were already going up. I think the statistic in a recent New York Times article that leapt out at me was that at the end of May of this year, the average price of a pound of ground roast coffee was $7.93, and it was $5.99 the year before. And this is before tariffs have any effect. And so tariffs won't begin to show up at supermarkets for at least 3 months after they're imposed, if they're imposed on Brazil. But already, climate change, various harvesting problems, political distribution problems within Brazil were causing prices to rise. This means that they would go way up. So it's going to be less coffee available from Brazil, higher prices at the cash register, and there aren't that many alternatives of non-tariff countries so far. Vietnam is one. Vietnam in the 80s and 90s turned itself into a coffee growing powerhouse. Very admirably. The main problem is that a very tiny percentage of Vietnam coffee has any flavor because there's two main kingdoms of coffee. Arabica, which needs high altitudes and cool temperatures at night to ripen and develop flavor, and has half the caffeine of Robusta, which is aptly named. It's robust. It grows in high humidity, hot climates, low fields. You don't have to break your back as people do, climbing up steep hillsides in Guatemala, in Panama, in Central America. Brazil has actually a much more kind of industrialized, low level at high altitude, meaning all on one level, you don't have to climb so much. They've really got coffee growing to a science in Brazil. But say that Vietnam is able to fill some of the gap. First of all, its production is nowhere near enough to fill a great shortage in Brazil for coffee importers in America who just can't afford the price that tariffs will require. And also, it's not very good coffee. So there aren't going to be many good alternatives if these tariffs go through. But with tariffs, Shirley, you know better than we do. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because for Trump, tariffs they're just one of another arrow in his quiver. It's either retaliatory, retributive, or to get the particular country to do something he specifically wants them to do or wants them not to do. So how can you say with any certainty whether or not these tariffs will be in place for any length of time? Like, what do you think would trigger him pulling back on something like this?
Some of his billionaire supporters saying this is going to hurt our business and you have to stop. But then he could reverse it again the way billionaire supporters and his own resorts made him declare, we're not going to have mass deportation raids in the hospitality industry and farming, because I love farmers and hospitality is terribly hardworking. Didn't mention anything about his own resorts. And then apparently Stephen Miller, I have no idea of the mechanics of it. Then a week and a half later, he reversed his decision. There are scary California farm raids. Yeah. People in masks from ICE. So
Nobody knows, Andrea. I mean, it's literally back and forth. And Corby, I was also very shocked about the statistic about the coffee prices going up, which I guess I shouldn't be as shocked, because I do feel like a cup of coffee is quite expensive. Yeah. It's been going up. I thought it was inflation, but it seems like there's other stuff going on too. I mean, you can't. I feel like when you, I guess between coffee beans and between milk, I mean, you can go to Starbucks or any coffee shop. It's like $6 or $7 for if you want a latte or something like that. It's so expensive now, and it
well,
probably
for sure. But it's also labor and the price of dairy, and alternative milks like almond and plant are pretty expensive.
That's right. Where do you want to go? You want to go
well, one of the reasons I love doing segments with Corby is because there's always something in Corby's segment that I've never heard of before, that it's an opportunity to talk about something brand new. I had no idea about this issue about the greenwashing of avocados. I don't eat a lot of avocados, but this is really a very interesting story. And then the fact that the United States importers are being sued because they're kind of lying to us about what's going on with avocados. Tell people what's happening.
It's knowingly or unknowingly. So the California avocado industry is really angry, and for good reason. If they say that they're growing sustainably, they aren't depleting water resources beyond relaxed regulatory environment means that they can deplete. It means that they aren't stripping rainforest or highly protected land to grow their avocados, but that's what's happening in Mexico. And so Mexico can say, we didn't use pesticides, we're growing it sustainably, but in fact they've, raised trees. They've wrecked entire ecosystems to clear land to plant avocados. So, there's nothing sustainable about the use of water or the way they have land available to grow avocados. And yet the technicalities of what constitutes a sustainably grown avocado are able for them to, plaster a fig leaf, to mix plant metaphors over their avocados. And California growers, who are actually much less and fewer in number because Mexico dwarfs U.S. grown avocado, are enraged, and they should be, because their production expenses are so much higher. But also, again, getting back to tariffs, there's been a carve out for Mexican avocados. There's no tariff on Mexican avocados. So this is particularly hurting California farmers.
Why is there no tariff on Mexican growers?
No, Civil Eats, which is the go-to food policy place for me, and farming and agricultural policy, didn't say why. I don't know. Shirley, you're supposed to be able to decode all of these tariff cutouts.
Well, I like this idea of banning avocados that aren't sustainable,
right,
or it seems like, right, there one member of Congress or several members want to look into that, saying that we shouldn't import avocados that are grown on deforested lands and that aren't sustainable. And I totally forgot that America, we actually have I feel like most of my avocados are from Mexico. I don't know if I buy that many California avocados, but we should buy more avocados from
They're harder
America.
to come by. It was Senator Peter Welch from Vermont, a Democrat, who said we really have to look into the way avocados are raised. And the former U.S. ambassador to Mexico, Ken Salazar, had said, period, Mexican avocado exporters shouldn't have the chance to sell into the U.S. because their environmental practices are so disastrous. That was very definitive, but he's the previous ambassador, and he was only an ambassador.
Yeah. Well, of course, if we bought avocados only from the U.S., it'd probably be much more expensive, right?
And scarcer.
Right. We wouldn't have. My kids love avocados, so we eat a lot of avocados. So yeah, but I guess I would pay more. I would pay more if I knew they were American grown. But again, most of the avocados I see in the store are from Mexico. They're not from the U.S.
Well, sometimes it just takes a banning or a sanction to get at least some of the policies or more truth in advertising. Raise awareness.
Or Trader Joe's, Whole Foods. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know if Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, we're not going to buy, avocados that aren't grown sustainably. That will do it, right?
They'll never make this pledge on their own. It would only be if other chains were doing it.
Right.
They would never go on. I hope they would. Famous last words with any luck.
Right.
So, Corby, I don't even want to say the initials RFK Jr., but I will. So we talked I think it was the last time I was co-hosting, we talked about the MAHA report, Make America Healthy Again report. We largely focused on all the mistakes that were in it. But this notion, RFK has become very fond of the banning of ultra-processed foods, which is not by any stretch a bad thing. It's actually a very, very good thing. And a lot of this report had to do with the dangers of ultra-processed foods and their connections to chronic diseases. So talk to us about the direction that he's taking Health and Human Services in with regard to ultra-processed foods, and then marry that, if you can, with some of the administration's other initiatives, which seem to be undermining any real effort to lessen the impact of ultra-processed foods.
The tide is finally turning. My compatriots in nutrition and I were thrilled by the idea of no more ultra-processed foods in in school lunch. One of the main problems of saying that, which is a very good campaign line, and it sounds great, is there's no agreed upon definition of ultra-processed foods. Every current definition would include all the whole wheat bread you buy in a store and almost all the fruit yogurt you buy in a store. So there's plenty of things that are ultra-processed that can be good. And there are lots and lots of ingredients that are in ultra-processed foods that could be damaging and could be the reason for these linked to higher chronic illnesses.
And
But
cancer
there's no
too.
science-
And
cancer, but there's no scientific evidence yet. And the main researcher at the National Institutes of Health, who was finding the answer to what is it about ultra-processed foods, which ingredients don't satisfy our hunger, lead us to consume 500 more calories a day and 2 pounds a week, as a landmark study 5 or 6 years ago by now that Kevin Hall at the NIH led, did prove. He was doing a follow-up to tease out what is it about ultra-processed foods. Well, his talking points were being rewritten by the White House in answers to the New York Times, and he said, "You're trying to rewrite my findings. You're actually rewriting what I've said, and I can't stay with scientific integrity." The head of the NIH, Jay Bhattacharya, has said, "You can have whatever findings you want, come on back." He hasn't come back yet. So saying something about ultra-processed food is very different from knowing what it is about them that you should pull. The much larger point is you would have to be giving billions more to school and school lunches in order to substitute fresh and whole foods, as the MAHA report said needed to be done. It says really good things, but nothing the administration has done will fund it, or it has actual regulation that will reduce the things they don't want. What RFK Jr. announced in terms of colorings and food additives was all voluntary. So it's voluntary compliance. It wasn't changing or tightening regulations. If he wants to do that, it would be great if he did and actually regulated these things. Then the FDA has been decimated. There was a fantastic piece in the New York Times Magazine about the disintegration of the FDA since the new administration took hold. They won't be able to enforce it. But at least, it would be nice to have some teeth. Nothing the MAHA report has said yet has any teeth. And what the administration did do, separate from HHS, which RFK Jr. heads, we have to say it's fair because they probably had no consultation, was cut billions of dollars in USDA, Department of Agriculture funds, to local farms to bring fresh foods into schools. It was the Farm to Schools program. It was fantastic. It supported hundreds and hundreds of farmers in each state to sell right into schools and help school children eat fresher and whole foods. Canceled, done, leaving much less fresh food, and what money there is still available for fresh food that's going to be trucked in from California. It's going to be much lower in nutrient quality, probably because of the travel time, just not as high quality. So nothing they've done matches their rhetoric to date.
And as we just pointed out, parents are not going to be able to provide, beyond the schools, parents will be less able to provide fresh produce and fresh food at home because their SNAP benefits are getting cut.
That's right.
And they're reducing all the possibility of eating healthier with these farm cuts and with the SNAP cuts. Something I do want to say is even though the feds haven't enacted any of these regulations, Texas enacted an incredibly important bill saying we are getting ultra-processed foods out of schools and we're not going to buy anything that the European Commission doesn't consider safe. It's the so-called grass loophole, generally recognized as safe.
Thank you, Corby. Corby, we got a break.
We got to go.
We got a break.
All right, well, we're speaking with Corby Kummer. He's the executive director of the Food Society Policy Program at the Aspen Institute. He's the senior lecturer at Tufts School of Nutrition. Coming up after this quick break, we'll bring you our vaunted Two More Things segment. I'm Shirley Leung, in for Margery Egan. She's Andrea Cabral, in for Jim Browdy. We're listening to BPR and GBH and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
Trusted, local, News.
The Department of Homeland Security says it plans to subpoena Harvard for information on its foreign students.
GBH News.
Travelers at Logan Airport are celebrating a new policy dropping the shoes off requirement at TSA checkpoints.
Here for what matters to you.
Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell says her office is actively investigating the bankruptcy and breakup of the Steward healthcare system.
GBH 89.7. Online at gbhnews.org.
Support for our programs comes from you.
And Concord Park, a Volunteers of America senior community in Concord, offering wellness care and support services to help seniors age in place, including a Compass Memory Support Neighborhood. ConcordPark.org/care. And Maine Maritime Museum, offering oyster tasting cruises throughout the summer. Visitors can learn about aquaculture from Maine's oyster farmers and experience freshly shucked oysters. MaineMaritimeMuseum.org.
Welcome back to BPR. I'm Andrea Cabral. I'm here with Shirley Leung, who we are both in for Jim Braude and Margery Egan. We're streaming live at youtube.com/GBH News. It's time for our Two More Things segment, which today is going to be more like one big more thing segment. Yeah. We take a few minutes just to talk about things that we couldn't shove into other segments, basically. So, Shirley, what is our one big thing today?
Well, I just came back from a week-long vacation in Canada. Specifically, I drove to Montreal. I have not been to Canada in about 17 years. And we rented an Airbnb in Montreal for a week, and I had a great time. I can't believe it's been I waited 17 years to go back to Canada. I guess I felt a little guilty as an American what Trump has been doing to Canada, right. our longtime allies. And so it's like, I'm going to spend some, I know Canadians aren't vacationing in the U.S. since they're so mad at us, but I decided, you know what? I'm going to vacation in Canada. I'm going to spend a lot of money there. And certainly we did do that.
Well, one of the things that's just so fascinating about Canada, to your point, they have been our staunchest ally for a long time, and it just flabbergasted me that why pick on Canada? Why go after Canada? But it's so close to the United States, and it's basically a hop, skip, and a jump, and you go there and you see how they make systems like universal health care and transit systems work. So we only have like a minute, but just from your recent trip.
Oh my God.
Why can't we be more like Canada?
Right. Well, Montreal's, it's a bigger city than Boston, right? But their transit system is probably the same size. It seemed like, based on the map, the same size as our subway. And it was awesome. It was faster to jump on the trains than to drive in Montreal. Stations were clean, spotless. They came every 5 minutes. You had a train show up. I mean, I was thinking why can't we have a system like this? Right. This is awesome. So I want to do more research on that. Why can't we have a subway system like Montreal? Certainly, we can't have one as big as London or Paris or New York City, but we could have one just like Montreal. We could do that in Boston.
We could make America Canadian again.
Exactly. We could. Oh my God, I love that. So anyways, that was our one more thing today. So coming up after the 1 o'clock news, the Reverends Irene, Monroe, and Emmett G. Price III join us for All Rev'd Up on BPR. I'm Boston Globe business columnist Shirley Leung, in for Margery Egan. She's former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety Andrea Cabral, in for Jim Braude. You're listening to BPR on GBH and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
GBH thanks all of our members whose gifts help power this station. And there are so many different ways to make that gift. Learn more about ways you can make an impact online at gbh.org/planning.
Support for GBH comes from you.
And South Coast Artists, presenting its 22nd annual Open Studio Tour July 19th and 20th in Tiverton and Little Compton, Rhode Island, and Dartmouth and Westport, Massachusetts. You can download the tour brochure at southcoastartists.org. And Boston Children's Museum, featuring 100 Acre Wood, a Winnie the Pooh experience. Visitors can sort honey and acorns with Pooh Bear and Piglet, bounce with Roo and Tigger, or read one of Owl's favorite books. Tickets at bostonchildrensmuseum.org.
You're listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston. Online at gbhnews.org. GBH News. What matters to you?
I'm Andrea Cabral, in for Jim Browdy. Ahead on hour number 3 of BPR, it's the return of the Revs, Irene Monroe and Emmett G. Price III, here to unpack how the Catholic Church has shaped America's views on the death penalty and how the misleadingly named Big Beautiful Bill may mark the end of compassionate conservatism. We're also going to get the Revs' thoughts on the genre-defying, mind-bending movie Sinners.
I'm Shirley Leung, in for Margery Egan. Then we'll end the show with you, opening up phone and text lines to talk about bad neighbors. Inspired by a Nantucket homeowner's lawsuit against her neighbor for chopping down her 50-year-old trees just to get a better ocean view. I don't have any bad neighbors. Now, I'm starting to worry I might be the bad neighbor. Share your stories. Are you the bad neighbor? Call or text next on the third hour of BPR on 89.7 GBH.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The U.S. is sending Ukraine air defense systems through its allies. President Trump and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte met at the White House today. They announced a plan for European countries to purchase advanced weapons intended to help Ukraine defend against Russia's ongoing military assault. Meanwhile, President Trump is attempting to pressure Russia into agreeing to a ceasefire deal with Ukraine within 50 days. Otherwise, Trump says Russia faces stiff tariffs. NPR's Greg Myrie tells NPR's Here and Now it's uncertain if that'll persuade Russia to change course.
It's hard to see exactly what that tariff will mean. And again, just to make an obvious point, the U.S. and Russia trade very, very little. So a tariff threat against Vladimir Putin is not exactly likely to scare him all that much.
NPR's Greg Myrie. This afternoon, Trump was scheduled to attend a luncheon for the White House Faith Office he established as a link between faith-based groups and federal agencies. Kirk County commissioners are holding their first public meeting since the deadly flooding over the 4th of July holiday weekend in central Texas. Some of the questions have been about timelines for recovery, something that has hampered efforts to deal with the latest heavy rainfall and flood risks. Nearly every county in the U.S. has experienced flooding in the past few decades, but only around 4% of homeowners nationwide have flood insurance. That's according to the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Experts call it the flood insurance gap, and it's leaving millions of people in serious financial risk when disasters hit. Here's NPR's Michael Copley.
Most homeowners insurance doesn't cover flooding, and federal disaster aid is usually just a fraction of what people need to repair or replace their homes. That's why experts say people need flood insurance, which most get through the National Flood Insurance Program. But flood insurance can be expensive, especially for people on tight budgets. So many roll the dice and hope a flood doesn't happen, says Brian O'Connell, an analyst at Insurance Quotes.
And when it does happen, and we talk to people who it happens to, it's one of the worst things people ever experience in their lives.
Experts say flood insurance can keep people out of financial distress and homes from going into foreclosure. Michael Copley, NPR News.
Dozens of residents at a Massachusetts assisted living facility are displaced because of a fire late last night. Local investigators say 9 people were killed and at least 30 others were injured at the Gabriel House facility in Fall River. They say firefighters arrived to find heavy smoke and flames at the front of the building. The cause of the fire is under investigation. U.S. stocks are trading higher this hour. The Dow Jones Industrial Average now up 42 points at 44,414. The Nasdaq has risen 70 points. The S&P is up 8. From Washington, this is NPR News.
Good afternoon from the GBH Radio Newsroom in Boston. I'm Henry Santoro. As we just heard from our colleagues at NPR, the investigation continues into the fire at a Fall River assisted living facility that claimed 9 lives last night. Reports of the fire at the Gabriel House came in around 9:30. At a news conference earlier today, Fall River Fire Chief Jeffrey Bacon credited firefighters, police, and EMS workers for evacuating dozens of residents with limited mobility. Bacon says if it weren't for the first responders, the loss of life could have been much worse.
It's a difficult, very difficult morning in the city of Fall River, and people are doing as best they can, but praying for them.
Governor Maura Healey says the state is assisting officials in Fall River as the recovery plays out. And with a federal grant funding up in the air, word from Boston Public School officials is that they are not currently planning to cut staff whose programs rely on those grants. Superintendent Mary Skipper says the funding hasn't been officially rescinded and that it's in a delay, and she doesn't believe it'll impact the upcoming school year or any ongoing summer programs. News comes days after the Trump administration announced it would withhold $6 billion in congressionally approved education funding nationwide until further review. In sports, the red-hot Red Sox and the rest of the Major League Baseball teams are all off for the All-Star break. Sox back in action on Friday, starting the second half of the season in Chicago against the Cubs. Tonight is the Home Run Derby. 84 degrees in Boston. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Capital One, offering their premium travel card, Venture X. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. Details at CapitalOne.com. And listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
Welcome back to hour number 3 of BPR. I'm Boston Globe business columnist Shirley Leung with former Massachusetts Secretary of Public Safety Andrea Cabral. We're filling in for Jim Braude and Margery Egan today. We're streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Jim and Margery will be back tomorrow, live from the BPL, with Frontline's Michael Kirk, CNN's John King, Sports Authority Trenni Casey, and more. Hello again, Andrea.
Hello again, Shirley. As we round into hour number 3, we're going to be joined by Reverends Irene, Monroe, and Emmett G. Price. The third, they do the All Rev'd Up podcast. Reverend Irene Monroe is a syndicated religion columnist in the Boston Voice for the Detour's African American Heritage Trail. Emmett G. Price III is the founding pastor of Community of Love Christian Fellowship in Allston and the inaugural Dean of Africana Studies at Berklee College of Music. Together, as I say, they host the All Rev'd Up podcast, which is, of course, available wherever you get your podcasts. Hello, Revs.
Hey,
Andrea.
happy
Hey,
summer.
Shirley. Hi.
So good to see
Hi,
you
good to
both.
see you.
Happy summer. I like that.
I'm loving the estrogen here.
The estrogen surge, yeah.
Thanks,
Irene.
Thank you. You're welcome.
So one of the themes of today's show is we've been talking about Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill and the impact on everything from health care, Medicaid to SNAP benefits. And one of the things we want to talk about, I'm embarrassed to say I've never heard of this term of is it conservative, compassionate conservatism? Yeah. Well, that some pundits are calling this bill as the quote unquote final burial of compassionate conservatism. Tell us why it's being called that and the significance of the burial of compassionate conservatism.
Irene, you go for it.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just say this. It didn't work with Baby Bush. It did not surface its face with Baby Bush, and it definitely isn't surfacing its face with Trump. It's anything but compassionate. With Baby Bush, he ran his campaign, and we got to remember who's in office. Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, Karl Rove, all of this was supposed to be compassionate conservatism, and it was one of the meanest campaign presidential campaigns we saw, because he ran his campaign not only on LGBTQ issues, but the whole idea is that these policies are supposed to support traditional family, welfare reform to promote, individual responsibility, like, workfare. It's supposed to set a standard for school, this whole notion that no child is left behind. And it's also supposed to provide economic, assistance to poor countries around the world. We didn't see this with Baby Bush. We need to tell the truth about this. And so with Baby Bush, not only was it an gay platform, but it was the new, this was a new way of extending the tentacles of quote, religious freedom, because they had the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that codified discrimination.
So it was never compassionate.
It was never compassionate. No. It's just degrees, it's degrees of meanness, really, at this point. And we got to understand, we get here not just because Trump got voted. We get here starting with Reagan. Then we move. By the time we get to the Bushes, again we see these erosions of civil rights. And Baby Bush, who was a born again Christian, who said he saw the risen Christ on the road to Damascus, you would think he would be more compassionate around issues of poor and people who are disenfranchised and dispossessed in this country. So we get where we are because of what Republican governments have done all along and called it a different name.
Well, Emmett, Shirley and I were talking about this, and I sort of expressed partly, what Irene expressed, which is that I never thought of it as compassionate conservatism, and that Republicans, because they play such a long game, these were the first steps toward getting us to where we are now. And it was the infusion of faith-based initiatives as a way of infusing religion into government more and more. So we would get to the place where we're going to talk about in a little while. The IRS basically says to churches, you know what, we're going to drop the pretense. Go ahead and endorse anybody you want. But what does it say that we are actually looking back on those days of Bush as the halcyon days of republicanism?
Yeah.
So I don't know how to react to this.
Well, I mean, you hit it on the head. I mean, I remember the Reagan years and the Reaganomics, being a young guy, growing up in the inside of Los Angeles and the trickle down economics of all of that. And then, of course, the Bush father and son. And the fact is that each of them had their own version of this kind of Christian nationalistic identity, and the integration of that identity, the cultural practice of theology, and the way they were going to run the country. And so Bush, the son, as you just articulated, was focused on funding faith-based charities that were oriented towards working to help the poor, the immigrant, and particularly the addict. And now where Trump is deporting the poor, deporting clearly the immigrant, and deporting anybody seen as the least of these based on his own determination, essentially trying to rectify, in his terminology, the browning of America.
Yeah.
Right? Because demographers look at 2040 as the flipping of the nation from a quote unquote white majority to a people of color, which is the majority globally. People of color are the majority globally. Of course, need to listen to that. So he's trying to rectify that.
That's right. And Angela, oh my God.
People do that all the time. It's fine.
I haven't had enough coffee yet, but this is the thing here. This is the deal here, that there were never any golden days under any of the Bushes or even with Reagan. Because with Reagan, I remember this, that's when we got this crazy notion of reverse discrimination, the Bakke case. By the time that we get to Baby Bush here, we got to understand there's a level of complicity, there's an intentionality around around historical amnesia when it comes to Americans here. And the other thing that we have to realize, we have always been in boiling water. It's like the frog in the boiling water.
Right.
Now, at this point, it is just totally unbearable. One of the things that we don't, meaning we, because I'm a Democrat, is that when you talk about a long game that the Republicans have, the problem that we have as Democrats is that we don't have a game. And the problem with that is always this belief that, oh, this is just a moment in time. No, it's not. Because waiting for that moment in time to turn the dial, we have seen the erosion of civil rights. One of the things that I thought I could bet my last penny on was that I would never see the overturn of Roe v. Wade. But you live, as I say, you live long enough, you will just see just about anything.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. So you go from to your point, the Bakke decision. There is a straight line between the Bakke decision and an executive order that tries to literally outlaw DEI and enshrine racism. It's a straight line. But the bigger point, and I think the most important point is, Democrats think that democracy is its own best ambassador. And if we just have a democracy, we just do good things like the Great Society and the New Deal, everybody will get on board. You have to have a plan. Republicans understand having a plan.
But see, one of the problem around this sort of lack of agency here is that when you look at the civil rights movement and you're looking at the 70s, and then you're looking at the late 70s going into the 80s, you're already looking at have always been marginalized groups of people. So the dominant culture tends to take a back seat because it's not about me. But this is one time that it affects everybody. It's impossible if you're a woman, if you're gay, if you're a certain ethnic group, if you're poor. This hits everybody. The problem that troubles me about this is that it also hits his constituents, the MAGA constituents.
Right. But they're not tuned into that. That's not what they're focused on. Yeah.
Well, okay, then I'll let you have that.
No, all I'm saying is they're focused on the grievance and the distraction is the grievance, the scapegoating.
Yeah, but see, what happens here is that while you don't want to look at issues of race and color, let's put all those buzz issues off the table. The one thing that you cannot deny is climate change. Central Texas. We look at California. It's not just those blue states that the MAGA folks hate. It's the red states. These folks can't build their homes back any faster than anybody else. And the way in which the floods hit Texas, had they spent more money or on the issue, it wouldn't have been as devastating.
Right.
There was another federal policy that was a big news last week. This was about the IRS. It was quiet but very significant policy shift. Churches now can formally endorse political candidates without risking their tax-exempt status, which actually was news to me. I thought the church pastors in some parts of the country were already endorsing political candidates. So why is this? Do you feel like this is still a big deal? Even though in practice, pastors were already endorsing political candidates.
It's a huge deal for a different reason than most presume, though, right? So you're right. As a pastor, I don't endorse candidates just because I believe in the separation of church and state. But many pastors do, whether subtly or directly, or invite them to the pulpit to speak and all that kind of stuff. The challenge is now the church is conceding the proper positioning of Jesus to the politicals who come every 2 to 4 years, right? So no longer is Jesus the centerpiece of the Christian church. Whatever your politic, your platform, your position, your posturing, your power, whatever that is going to supersede that, because we know that voting is a voluminous thing. It's about the people. And so all of these churches who control, and I use that word purposely, the mindsets and the kind of thought processes of these people will now parade these folks in and
well,
out.
see, Emmett, I disagree with Emmett. You know why?
You do.
Because of course, no,
we love that.
No. Well, I do in some levels, because it's needling you a tad. But this is a classic example. So you put Jesus in it, you think this is a neutral agent. This brother was also politicized. We got to realize that he was a Jew during Roman Empire. We got to understand that when we look at the biblical mandate in Matthew 25, when he says, feed the hunger, give room for the immigrant here. Those are political statements. See, the whole notion that politics doesn't exist, you delude yourself, because not taking a stance or not acknowledging a stance is a political stance. But beside this here, this is the bigger issue that I'm trying to get at here, is that what we clearly see that our forefathers had enshrined in the Constitution was a separation between church and state. We have seen with Trump 1.0 and now 2.0, the deliberate blurring of church and state. And what happens with these churches that are supposed to be, neutral spaces, sacred spaces, they now become politicized spaces. So what you have here, and we've no congregation where people are Democrats, Republicans, independent. But sometimes people go to church actually to worship and not hear politics and hear a good moral word, or see your neighbor in a different light. So I think it loses moral authority. I mean, it puts the pressure to endorse, a church here, and then just like I said, the whole erosion of church and state, it's very, very problematic. And just unequal treatment in terms of, some churches like these mega churches have a whole lot of money. But
that's what I was going to ask about. I mean, specifically, I'll start with them and then go to Irene. What kind of floodgates does this open in terms of, because I can only see Trump asking the IRS or demanding that the IRS ease up on this because he sees it as a way to funnel money in a much more organized fashion to his campaign, and to directly campaign in some of these mega churches that have a lot of money. What do you think will actually happen? Because the smaller churches don't have the wherewithal to make the kinds of donations that he cares about. What do you think is going to happen?
I think it's break even, because there's a whole lot of big black churches in the country too, right? So it's not just down the line of ethnicity, race, white supremacy, white evangelicalism, white nationalism. There's a whole lot of, and we always talk about these statistics, which I'm not fond of, but the statistics still show that black folks are more prone to be members of churches and be actively engaged in faith communities than our white ones. So
yeah, but Emmett, see, this is the problem with this here. First of all, Trump has always been about prosperity gospel. Okay, what I call bling bling theology here. Okay, yes, we do have a lot of black mega churches that also adhere to that, but we also have some huge mega churches, and this is not a black church, although there's a sister, at the pulpit here, like where I was just a couple of weeks ago, Riverside Church. That's a huge social activist, social gospel church here. So the whole idea is that if church is supposed to be that sacred space, and what I mean by sacred, it's a neutral space that democratizes everybody, that all life is of equal worth, whether you can pay or not pay, then what happens to those big churches like Riverside Church? It has big coffers too, but it wouldn't want to be supporting a candidate. I mean,
Riverside gets to decide. I guess that's my point, right? I mean, it's not a zero-sum game.
But why should that even be a decision? Why can't it be a society that we clearly say we are people of faith and no faith?
Irene, you sound so Pollyannish today.
No, I don't. No, I don't. I sound passionate. I sound passionate because there are also people. If you're talking about big people of no faith that have mega bucks. But I mean, this is the point about if we're talking about making America great. But I sort of like whoever said make America Canada, because they seem to have a lot more sense than we do.
Andrea.
Okay, but they seem to have more sense.
And I mean, what are church leaders actively debating? Deciding we're going to endorse or not endorse. I mean, because some could decide even though it's we're not going to be face any fines from the IRS or risk our tax exempt status. Some churches may just decide we're not going to get into the endorsement game.
I mean, endorsement happens in a multitude of ways. Sometimes you have your elected official come by on a certain Sunday to share a political platform that will benefit the people. You haven't said vote for this person, but you're giving the person the platform.
Right.
So, I mean,
I went to a few when I was running for sheriff. I'm not going to lie, I was there.
I mean, so it happens. Now, whether, Elon Musk is going to show up and give, a couple of $1 million to Riverside and suggest that, with this donation, I would like for you to do X, Y, and Z. I think that may be what I was talking about. And the faith leaders got to make a decision whether to accept the money or not.
Well, he already bought votes in Wisconsin, so, he has had a lottery for votes, so that's not that far off. Not that I think he'll do it for Trump this time around, because they're not friends anymore. But still, there's the potential.
Yeah, but I think that what we miss here is the grossness, the odiousness of how now how much money you have is predicated on who not only you support, but who gets to the highest office. And we see that's not always for our moral good, along with our economic good here. So I think that we have to think outside of the Trump paradigm and think of a way in which we can bring, I call the entire village, not only to the church should it want to, but bring America back to some of its core values while we expand as a country.
Okay, so we only have a couple of minutes left, but I want to get both of your takes on the influence of the Catholic Church's position on capital punishment, how you feel it is either shaped or not shaped American policy on the death penalty, because we're at a place with the death penalty in the United States that would have been unthinkable in the 1980s. So I'll start with Emmett. We'll finish up with Irene. We only have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I think people who believe that life is a precious gift from the divine, and who, meaning that I believe that we got to live out that, and stay firm. I think, the movie that was talked about 30 years ago.
Dead Man Walking.
Dead Man Walking.
Dead Man Walking.
Sister Helen Prejean.
Yeah, I mean that the level of her faith and the even the stuff that she went through in order to fulfill her faith. I think we just need those who believe that need to be out about that.
Well, you know what? The church didn't always feel that way. I mean, it wasn't really until the Second Vatican Council, that was in 1962 to 65, that they marked a turning point, finally saying that inherent dignity of every human being, there's inherent dignity. All life is of equal worth, even the criminal. So yeah.
But once they turned the corner, they were all in, and it's been pretty strident.
Yeah, that's true on some level, but they got some criminals in their churches. Okay, because you would think they would address the child abuse thing, but I think that it's wonderful to, and I think that that's where you change the heart and consciousness.
I mean, sometimes you just have to give credit where credit is due.
Never. She's not gonna do it. Y'all keep praying for her.
I'm not throwing away the baby with the bath water. I'm keeping the baby, but sometimes you gotta look at some of that muddy water that still leaves a ring around the tub.
Well, okay. I mean, what I was basically sort of saying is, you look at how long, it sort of takes to sway public opinion, but this is a real sort of cause and effect moment.
That's right.
And it's not that other churches aren't prominent in their anti-death penalty advocacy, but the Catholic Church is so large and is so organized. I just thought it was worth taking a moment to remark how that their policy or their advocacy has reached a particular peak in the United States, and it's reflected in the polling around the death benefit.
Are you in? You know what? Okay, are you substituting for Margery? Because I think Margery would say that. See, Margery, Margery would love you today and be rolling her eyes at me once again.
I was raised Catholic. I haven't been Catholic for a very, very long time, but I am able to recognize the things that are good and the things and disagree with the things that I disagree with. And I think this is one place where there were a series of popes being very sort of intentional about it. They've been leaders around this, and it's been reflected in our...
But can I just say this? I really think that it's really been the Black church that has changed the moral consciousness on that issue because of the discrepancy in our penal system. And I think because of mass incarceration, the industrialization of it, if anybody has changed that, to me, I think it's been the Black church, because we are disproportionately incarcerated.
We're disproportionately incarcerated, but if you're talking about whether or not the Black church has a level of sway, holds a level of sway over white parishioners, white Catholic parishioners, you're wrong there. That's the Catholic Church. So yeah, I like I said, I'm not taking away from the Black church or any other church and many have been strident in their anti-death penalty advocacy, but the Catholic Church turned the corner, took a stand, and they have been relentless in their advocacy. And I think we see the results of it in American policy. But Irene, we love each other and we can agree to disagree.
Indeed. I so much appreciate this moment.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. We've been speaking with the Reverend Irene Monroe.
Summer.
Happy summer. We're speaking with the Reverend Irene Monroe and Emmett G. Price III for All Rev'd Up. Reverend Irene Monroe is a syndicated religion columnist and the Boston voice for Detour's African American Heritage Trail. Emmett G. Price III is founding pastor of Community of Love Christian Fellowship in Alston, the inaugural dean of Africana Studies at Berklee College of Music. Together, they host the All Rev'd Up podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. That was a very lively conversation with them. Coming up after this quick break, we open up the lines to get your thoughts on neighbor disputes. One undeniably bad neighbor in Nantucket is being sued for cutting down his neighbor's beloved trees so he could enhance the ocean view from his own house. Whether we've been on the receiving or giving end of a bad neighbor behavior, we all have stories. Give us a call. Next on BPR, I'm Shirley Leung. She's Andrea Cabral. We're in for Jim and Margery. You're listening to BPR 89.7 GBH and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
I'm Arun Roth. Coming up on GBH's All Things Considered, the latest on the horrific fire at an assisted living facility in Fall River that's left 9 people dead and dozens. NBA star and Worcester Academy grad Aaliyah Boston is back in Massachusetts and being honored at the State House, and how scientists are looking into how to minimize some of the changes even healthy brains experience as we age. Those stories and all the day's news starting at 4 on GBH 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you.
And Mass General Brigham. Their leading heart and vascular specialists are committed to providing breakthrough care to patients with cutting-edge research and innovative treatments. Learn more at massgeneralbrigham.org/heart. And the Peabody Essex Museum, presenting Knowing Nature, Stories of the Boreal Forest. Captivating photos and interactive displays take visitors inside a vast wilderness. Opens July 26th. PEM.org.
Welcome back to BPR. I'm Andrea Cabral. She's Shirley Leung, and we are in for Jim and Margery. Streaming live at youtube.com/GBH News. Jim and Margery will be back tomorrow with the BPL. As a rule, this radio show loves a good bad neighbor story. So when we read about the Nantucket man who cut down his neighbor's beloved trees just to improve his own sightline to the ocean, We just knew we had to talk about it on the show today. We want you to call or text us at 877-301-8970. You can weigh in on this particular story or give us your own bad neighbor stories. And by the way, if you think that your neighbors all around you are great, you might actually be the bad neighbor. In case you haven't heard about this, I'll give you a little more context about the bad neighbor story. So 3 months after a Nantucket chainsaw tree massacre, this guy hacked down 16 of his neighbors' beloved cedar, cherry, and cypress trees. He then put his own house on the market with its brand new sweeping view of the Atlantic Ocean on the market for a cool $10 million. These trees had been in the other property owner's family since the 70s. They had literally planted these trees and had been caring for them since the 70s. The now treeless neighbor has filed criminal trespassing charges and is also suing them. Good for her. So we want to hear from you, whether you've done some unspeakable wrong to your neighbor and need to get it off your chest, however anonymously, or you've been on the receiving end of some gnarly neighbor behavior. Please give us a call, 877-301-8970. And don't ever forget about the story of the poison trees in Maine last summer, or how about Spittin' Mad Martha Alito, who was a great neighbor, did terrible things to her neighbors who took some exception to Trump administration policies. Remember Margery's downstairs neighbor who carved her? Margery put pumpkins, uncarved pumpkins, on her stoop in Halloween years ago, and her neighbors actually carved her pumpkins. I don't know why we just can't all get along. But call or text us, 877-301-8970. All right, so are you the bad neighbor, or are you someone who has had to endure bad neighbors?
I've been both. Let me start with me being the bad neighbor story. Actually, it's not me. It's my, at the time, 3-year-old son, who we were just, playing around with the neighbor at the neighbor's house, next door neighbor. And for some reason, my son had to pee. And instead of walking a few steps to go home to pee, he decided to just pee on their lawn. It was awful. I was so embarrassed, and they no longer live there anymore. They moved away. They moved to Vermont. And so, but I was horrified. I don't know.
Vermont has very strict don't pee in my yard.
Yeah, but I don't understand what would possess my 3-year-old to decide I'm just going to pull down my pants and just pee, right here.
Because he's little and he's a kid. And because there doesn't seem to be a good reason not to.
And then, suffice to say, he hasn't done that again. He's 14 now. But I am a good neighbor now. We have a pretty big backyard in Milton, and when we moved there, we bought like a fancy, one of these fancy playground sets, right? And our kids are 12 and 14 now, and so they don't play on the playground, but we let our next door neighbors come, and they have young kids, probably kindergarten, elementary school, so they come and now play on our playground, which is nice.
So you have had both experiences.
We've made amends. What about you?
I'm a pretty good neighbor. I mean, I take care of my property. I'm not loud or anything like that.
You also live in Milton, right?
I do. I live in Milton. So, I don't think I am. But then I also say to myself, do people who are bad neighbors really know that they're bad neighbors? I mean, if your neighbors call the cops on you, then you can have some idea, or if they complain all the time. But a lot of times people don't really complain. They just kind of endure overly loud music or arguing.
That's right.
or bad upkeep, or the neighbor's leaves in their yard, or a tree falling down in their yard from their neighbors. So I don't know how much people are aware that they're bad neighbors if they are bad neighbors, but it largely depends on whether or not you screw up the courage to go over and tell them, because that's difficult too. Like, you want to say, can't you just wake up and realize how annoying what you're doing is? And you don't really want to say anything because you don't want to establish a bad relationship. So that's why the neighbor story really got us, because this wasn't just a case of loud music. This guy literally walked onto his neighbor's property, this guy in Nantucket. What is this guy's name, by the way? This is in the paper. His name is Jonathan Jacoby.
You think he should be
to his
deported?
neighbors.
You think he should be deported?
Yes, I think we should leave undocumented immigrants alone and deport this guy to some country that he's not from. But he just walked onto their property. It's 16 of these trees that they planted, and I don't know. And then he puts his place on the market for $10 million. So anyway.
So we've got a call from Gardner. Annie from Gardner.
Hi, Annie.
Hi, great topic. So I had a neighbor in Vermont who was retired and had a lot of time on his hands. And when I would mow my lawn, we didn't have fences between our huge backyard lawns. When I would mow my lawn, he would accuse me of allowing a few of my grass clippings to end up on his lawn. And he ended up putting police tape, literally the yellow and black police tape, extending it from the very back fence of our properties all the way up to my garage, dividing our lawn. And then I forgot, he also made a sign that said, "No grass clippings," on the other side, and he put that in my property in the middle of a little flower patch.
Oh, wow.
It was hilarious. And, I was like a single mom trying to just keep my head down and not irritate my neighbors who had been there forever, and I had just moved there, and it ended up being fine. And years later, he was like giving us extra vegetables from his garden. But
that's nice.
It took some peacemaking and deep breathing.
So, Annie, I have a question on grass clippings. So I feel like there's two kinds, right? When you mow the lawn, there's the kind that just kind of like you're just sprinkling. You can barely notice they're there. But then there are the clumps of grass clippings, right? Sometimes there's clumps of them.
Right.
So what kind did you have? The clumps or the kind of more, the kind that you can't see?
Oh, this was the kind you couldn't see.
He was upset about that. Not just the clumps.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And he would walk around sort of monitoring the border between our lawns,
That
like
is
smoking
hilarious.
a cigarette and scrutinizing what kind of grass had come over from my side. Because my side wasn't fancy grass, and he had put in kind of fancy something or other grass, so he could tell, apparently.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Your grass was not as good as his grass.
Not at all.
It is. Thank you for the call, Annie. But it is really funny what sets people off, what becomes the pet peeve for the neighbor, what bothers them versus what doesn't. That is an extreme example, but he must have really cared about his grass.
Oh, we're getting lots of texts.
Yeah, we're getting lots of texts. So Peter from Mystic, Connecticut says, my worst neighbors were the two young women who lived upstairs from me in the South End and brought home their dates, which he puts in quotation marks, 7 nights a week to have a loud party and do other activities. Lots of yelping. I lived in the South End for many, many years. Now that he brings that up, I had sort of forgotten about my South End days. South End, yeah, South End was loud. Yeah, I used to have neighbors that were loud in the South End too, Peter. But yeah.
So I also lived in the South End before I moved to the suburbs, and I did this story one year where I once I had my first kid, we moved to the suburbs, right? And we kept our place in the South End. We rent it out now, and I remember we were in between tenants one year, and so I decided, could I have stayed in the city with my kids? So we spent the weekend living, in our South End apartment. And you forget, we're in a single family in the suburbs, and you forget when you're in the city that, we were on the third floor, so we had neighbors upstairs. You can hear everything.
Oh, yeah,
every little step,
Yes.
You can hear people walking around. I'm sure our neighbors below us could hear my little kids running around too. You forget, I guess. You
can hear people sneeze. You can hear people cough.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you can hear everything,
Yeah.
and you don't realize that, and you forget about that until after moving back into to the city for the weekend. So let's see. Let's get through some of the more texts. Let's see. Okay, Mary from Lakeville. I guess this is highlighted. I guess that's why we're supposed to read that one first. So Mary from Lakeville, I have been a terrible neighbor. During the election, my neighbor had a Trump sign on their property, and one night I ran over it on purpose. Whoops.
Yeah, and our crew said, Mary, I think this is a crime. But But the statute of limitations will run soon, so kind of keep that to yourself.
Should we get to Marianne from Chelmsford?
Hi, Marianne.
Hi, second-time caller here.
Oh, that's great.
My son was an only child. We lived 2 doors down from a family that had kids that were younger. There was no one his age in the neighborhood at the time. And he was like the Pied Piper. He liked to organize stuff and play and with them. And, you know, they looked up to him. And anyway, he loved it. And we invited those children to his birthday party at one point. We did a big deal at some place, I forget, whatever. And they were still pretty little. And I said to the woman, my son loves your kids. He really does. And she said to me, no, I think he just loves our toys. And then, not too long after that, right, one of the kids drove this battery-operated, expensive toy that we didn't have. So she just assumed my son took it. She into my yard and just left it and went to play and do something else. And so she comes stomping over to my yard and screams at my kid. I'm in the house. I could hear her. Screams at my kid. No, you should bring it back to our house. And I came flying out of the house and I said, listen, lady, I watched out the window while your kid brought that thing over to my yard, trespassing, and left it in my yard. And how dare you? And she just walked away, no apology.
Yeah.
Nothing.
See, you do find out, I mean, that kind of stuff doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, first of all, people hate to be confronted with the fact that they've made a fool out of themselves and that they were wrong about something. But it is the amount of stuff that comes up, especially that involves kids and families and neighbors. You know,
my son never touched her toys because he was afraid of her.
Were her kids nice?
This was Hudson, Massachusetts. Let me tell you, Lee Circle. Okay?
But were her kids decent kids?
But if they're listening, I hope they hear.
Marianne, thanks for the call.
Thanks for the call, Marianne.
All right, so I asked Jamie and the team to bring back Nick from Wareham, the text that he has about roosters, because roosters are a big issue in the suburbs. And anybody who lives next to a chicken coop knows that. And but he describes himself as an unapologetic rooster owner. I predate the cookie cutter community that moved in next to me and won't evict my bird to accommodate them. If that makes me a bad neighbor, then so be it.
You know, I don't live near anybody who's got chickens, and I know that is sort of an issue in the suburbs, but I always I grew up across the street. It was almost all woods where I grew up, right? Across the street, the guy had sort of a mini farm. He had a couple of sheep. He had a horse. He had a rooster. I grew up hearing a rooster every single morning. It doesn't bother me at all. So, Nick, you know, you could live next to me and I wouldn't have a problem with it.
With the roosters?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. So I was
it's just a sound. It's a sound from my past. It doesn't bother me at all.
Maybe I would get used to it because I did a girls' trip to Key West, right, in the spring. And in Key West, they have roosters walking all over the street, right? It's some leftover from cockfighting or something like that.
Oh.
Anyways, it was, a thing in Cuba. A culture down there. Anyways, but the roosters, they literally be roaming the streets of Key West, and they would wake me up at like 5:30 in the morning. They would be cock-a-doodle-doing or whatever they were doing. But I would wake up every day at 5:30 listening to these roosters, and so I couldn't. But maybe if I lived there full time, or maybe if I lived next to roosters, maybe I would just get used to it. Maybe I wouldn't wake up every time.
Yeah, it's their thing. They're verbal. They're the verbal equivalent of turkeys. Like wherever they are is the place to be, and they do their thing. And they don't really care how you feel about it. Let's talk to Susan in Attleboro. Hi, Susan.
Hi. I hope you can hear me. I'm in the car in traffic. I'll turn my air conditioning down.
No, we can hear you. You sound great.
Okay. I live in the same house I've lived in for 35 years. I have 10 acres of land. It's all woods. My neighbors don't have any trees. They cut all their trees down because I have all the trees to make their yards bigger. So we went away for a weekend once, and my neighbor on the side of cul-de-sac that got built after I lived there, decided they wanted to make their yard like 30 feet deeper into the woods for their pool. So they cut down all my trees and extended their property 30 feet into my property. And when we kept hearing all the noise, we went out back and walked around the back part of the property and looked up, because like I said, it's all woods. And they started screaming at us for spying on them and walking around their property. It was amazing. I just can't even believe. We could have sued them for so much money, but we just told them to get all their crap out of our woods and be done with it. But I have a million stories. People think they own your property.
Well, here, I don't understand this, Susan. When you buy a piece of property, you have a property line. There are documents that show where your property ends and the next person's property begins. How do you just walk into a backyard and start cutting without having any sense of where you can be legally versus illegally? I don't understand this.
And usually you talk, if you're going to cut, trees that's on the property line, usually you ask your neighbors or tell your neighbors, hey, I'm going to cut some trees here.
and I'm on my property. I just want to make sure we understand the property line the same way. So what ultimately happened?
They know they weren't on there. They just sold the fields next to me. So I have $1 million houses next to me now. And somebody just decided they didn't like all the trees. So they had a tree company come in and start cutting down trees. I went over and I don't see any property line dropped. What are you doing? And they just go, well, they told us to cut down the trees. We just work for the tree company. They don't care. They could care less. And
it's also bad business.
People $3,500 per tree for cutting down illegally trees.
Good God.
If you want to sue them.
Well, Susan, thanks for the call.
We're sorry that happened to you. Julie from Quincy says, my neighbor did the same thing to our water line, and the neighbors were so upset. It was their trees. They now have put their house on the market. He can't wait to sell the house. He can't wait for the house to sell. I'm not understanding what she's saying.
Yeah, I think something about trees. There were a lot of tree issues.
Maybe at the water line. I don't know, but the neighbors were upset, and but it seems to be the tree thing. Seems to be a very big deal. Another anonymous texter says that my neighbors didn't like the trees planted in a park by the town for much needed shade. The neighbors complained repeatedly for the same reason as the Nantucket guy, the water views. The town said they cannot take down healthy trees, so the neighbors poured bleach on them to kill them.
This is just like that that family in Maine.
Yeah. They should absolutely be sued, and there should be criminal charges for destruction of public property. There's no question about that.
This is really interesting because I wish someone would cut down my trees. I was thinking about in terms of my property, right? We've spent a lot of money cutting down dead trees. I mean, because the trees, they're dying or they're weak. And, with all these storms we have, often the trees are like falling on our house we've had one tree fall on our house, another tree fall on my neighbor's house. And and it costs, $800 to cut down a tree.
I've had to do it a couple of times.
Most of our kind of landscaping expenses have been related to emergency tree cutting.
Right.
And so I wish more people would cut the trees down on my property line.
How about Ken in Hudson? Hi, Ken.
Hello. I just wanted to start off by saluting that person that ran over the Trump sign. I kind of like that idea. But I had, I feel like a three-prong story. My property adjoins a property that's owned by the Lake Boone Association, condo association. And one day I was just looking out of my window, and I saw a crew that were digging holes in my yard. And I went out and asked them what they were doing, and they said, "Oh, we're just putting up a fence." And I had no clue. Like I said, it was on my property. I had no clue what was going on. And so I finally got a hold of the the condo association guy, and he said, "Yeah, we wanted to put a fence up, but they where the holes were dug, it was of course a couple feet off of where the true property line was. So we finally resolved that, and there was a fence put up, and it was on the property line. So I didn't have any further issues with that. But then sometime later on, I'm inside my home, and I hear this chainsaw, and it's very loud. And I look out, and there's a crew that's cutting down a very old, mature, perfectly healthy oak tree. And I ran out there, and I screamed bloody hell at them. And I called the cops in, and they stopped cutting the tree down, but I insisted that they leave like about a 20-foot trunk left on the property. So the head of the tree is gone, but that stump is still there. And I want to let them look at it all they want. And then the final thing was, again, there was a big dump truck, very large dump truck, and they were backed onto my property, and they were dumping gravel onto my property. And again, I had no clue what was going on with that. And they said, yeah, the condo association decided they want to put some gravel down here. And I abruptly stopped them from doing that again. So, and that all this stuff happened years ago, but it's very, very frustrating, and I can relate to the people that have had, their neighbors, cut down their trees or have them, use their property as if they owned it. And I think I think people are just being selfish and not, respecting their neighbor's property at all.
And you'd also think, Ken, that a condo association would be acutely aware of where everybody's property lines are. Anybody who owns a condo and who's in the association, that they would certainly know that. That seems pretty negligent.
Yeah, the only thing I could think of is I said the part of my property that's near the condo association property, it's a right of way, and that has something to do with the frontage on the street.
Oh, I see.
I own that property, and it's like no one's supposed to do anything with it. It's just a dead zone, and there's not supposed to be any, there can't be any permanent structures there. There can't be anything. But again, the tree was on my property. It was maybe, it was fairly close to the condo association property, but that shouldn't matter. That's just doing the wrong thing.
Right. Thank you very much for the call, Ken.
All righty. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Looks like a lot of people have problems with their Trumpy neighbors.
Yeah, one way or the other, right?
That's right. We have Aaron from Medford saying, my mother's been feuding with her Trump neighbors for years. She just got a new puppy, and the next day they put out a no dogs allowed sign on their front yard, which, by the way, is about 5 feet of grass.
Yeah, it doesn't, that's the thing. The thing about this whole neighbor segment, I think it's the reason we're getting so many texts and so many calls, is it can start off as a relatively small thing or something that seems unrelated. And over the years, living next door, it just piles on. There was a movie called Good Fences, which was from the saying, good fences make good neighbors. That just, and it can grow into something really, there have been murder cases, lots of murder cases, lots of homicides that have started out as just bad neighbor stories. Paul, I think it's probably Paul from Worcester, reminds us that Margery also has neighbors who let their dogs pee on the plants she has on a little strip of curb grass that she tries to make pretty. So Margery's trying to beautify her neighborhood, and she has neighbors that allow their dogs to pee on it.
Well, there's often signs.
Right.
Don't pee.
Right.
It looks like, this is anonymous texter. This is why I got a fence. This is, you don't have to deal with the neighbors. Now, the next door neighbor, not the current next door neighbor, but the next door neighbor before the current neighbor, they put up a fence. They probably put up a fence 10 years ago, maybe a little more than 10 years ago. And that was a little jarring for us to, and we just moved, we're all fairly new to the neighborhood. And you're thinking to yourself, oh, did we offend them? This is before this is before the peeing incident.
I do think good fences make good neighbors, as long as it's, not something that looks like it's hiding a meth lab. I think it's fine to have a fence between your property and the neighbor's property.
Yeah, I'm used to it now.
Yeah.
And, I'm pretty used to it. Well, this has been another edition of BPR, and lots of people have stories about their neighbors, good and bad. So you can keep up with us 24/7 by way of our podcast, or check out our TikTok page at Boston Public Radio. Tune in tomorrow. Jim and Margery are back, and they're back at the BPL. They'll speak with Frontline's Michael Kirk, out with a new film on Trump and the rule of law. Plus NBC Sports Boston's Trenni Casey, CNN's John King. We'll have Joe Curtatone, who's the CEO of the Alliance for Climate Transition. Also, Emily Reichert, she's the CEO of Mass Clean Energy Center. They're going to discuss clean energy under Trump. Our crew is Zoe Matthews, Aiden Connolly, Nicole Garcia, and Hannah Loss, with additional support from Nia Harmon. Patrick Lally ran our YouTube stream today. Our engineer is John the Claw Parker. Our executive producer is Jamie Bologna. Stay tuned to The Culture Show, which starts immediately after us on 89.7 GBH. I'm Shirley Leung.
I'm Andrea Cabral.
Have a great afternoon, and thanks for listening.
What's trending? What's interesting? What's going on around town? We're talking all things arts and culture on The Culture Show, next on GBH 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you.
And MIT Sloan Executive Education, helping professionals empower their careers and explore over 90 courses blending cutting-edge research with real-world application. More at executive.mit.edu. Frontline investigates the high-stakes showdown between Donald Trump and the courts over presidential power, interviewing Trump allies, opponents, and experts. Watch Trump's Power and the Rule of Law tomorrow night at 10 on GBH2.
You're listening to 89.7 WGBH HD1 Boston. Online at